board's policy for aggression, bullying, text threats, provocateuring. We're doing our best to use nonviolent communication in this space, speaking with I statements, asking permission before giving advice or reflecting, and allowing the experiences and truths of others to be valid. Responsibility for our self-care. If you're feeling overwhelmed, triggered, or activated in any way, please do what you need to do to take care of you. And yeah, so moving forward now, introducing Patricia Ann Davis. Patricia Ann Davis, thank you so much for being here. It is such an honor to have your wisdom. And yeah, just I'll pass it over to you. I know you do have something to show us on the screen. And so if you need help pulling that up, let me know and I will pull it up on my end. Welcome, Patricia.
Well, thank you, Asteria. Thank you very much. You have brought us to a place of dealing with the healing process of deconstructing a mega entrenched thought forms on this planet. So greetings and welcome everyone to the Indigenous Ceremonial Change Process event. The title of this teaching is How to Rebalance the Divine Feminine and Masculine in the Context of Hojo, Indigenous Natural Order Spirituality. You hear that? That does not exist in English. I'm in the Southwest in New Mexico, and I am between the Isleta Pueblo. I'm in a small rural Chicano town, and I am between Isleta Pueblo and the Mescalero Apache. My spiritual family and all my relatives, and also everything that is good, beautiful, and true for children, for parents, grandparents, and families, the healing of nations is all that I speak. Thus, I greet you with a warm heart-to-heart hug as we celebrate the Hojonja ceremony, literally living the loving way as a way of life, a planetary cosmic reverent revolution. And I'll describe that to you from the resource going from the poor to the rich to the top, from the bottom to the top, to the reframe that I'm calling a planetary cosmic reverent revolution is clockwise from elder to youth for every decision we make for the next 7 generations. So that is the reframe. And so what I'm speaking is from the Dene Bazad oral tradition. Hojonja is a blessed way of life ceremony in what I'm going to call in common language 4 directions natural order template. Is the east, balance and living. Shad'a, south, harmony and communication. Peace and the family. Nahokos, north, beauty in the environment. Shabikaho, that is sunwise around the fireplace with love, with joy within our hearts and our homes. We're all collectively within these 24 hours initiating the rekindling of our ceremonial fireplace to enliven our spiritual well-being so that we may serve in the world as a spark of divinity with our inherent sovereignty and our inherent genius gift for our right livelihood, for our collective survival, that we may manifest healthy helping and safe procreation and peace and plenitude Now introducing myself in the Dene traditional way. My colonial American Indian boarding school name is, quote, Patricia Ann Davis. And I'm just saying Patricia Ann Davis and Shia. That's what I'm called. I have a ceremonial name and it is used only in ceremony for me, but is not used in the public arena. And as an Indigenous traditional healer, I'm an advocate and not an activist. Adolnet, tribal clan-wise, I'm born of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw and born into the Kachini, saying that I am born in of the Choctaw into the Kachini Inshla is the my mother's tribal identity, my spiritual identity through my mother and matriarchal is the Mississippi Band of Choctaws and born into Tachi Chilchin. So my maternal and paternal lineage is Chata Dene Eda Shache Do Kia Ani Eda Chanala Bien Dene Biaja Nshle Do Nihitle. I'm saying I'm a holy and sacred and precious child of Creator within Hojo, with Creator within Hojo, within creation, and so is everyone equally. And this greeting that I began with, impossible, there's no way, there's no words or terminology for saying, but not you. There's no way to exclude. It is cross-cultural, it's intergenerational, it is inclusive, it is universal in practical application, and can be translated into any language in any land. I give gratitude to my late father, Anselm Davis Sr. of Lucatucay, Arizona, who initiated me at age 8 years old, and he gave me my lifelong task. And when he said to me, quote, undo the thinking that has caused our people so much violence and suffering. I'm going to use the Indigenous ceremonial change process template. That means it's overarching to any domain to teach the sequencing of how to reframe our thinking out of the Eurocentric dualistic inverse thinking system. And we just have one word. It will show you on the chart. We have that one word. It's just hochon, and the ceremony for cleansing, purification, emptying, and reframing our intrapersonal, recalibrating, and then our interpersonal by reconfiguring. That's basically our aura to social coherence and social competence. So this long word here in Eurocentric dualistic inverse thinking system, the Western people believe that they're born into a deficient self-image. And so this thinking system is conditioning, engineering, social conditioning, and engineering people who win-lose. And there's no win for everyone. Destructive and death-producing outcomes. That's what we call hochon, just simple word. And into, so out of and then into the indigenous thinking system of win-win, constructive, and life-affirming decision for those outcomes. That is what we're calling hojo. And you can hear the difference, the vibration and in the sound. These two choices are the only two intentions, either destructive and death-producing or constructive and life-affirming. So historically, women and people of color have had to agree to lose and pay to lose, particularly in the majority of societies where culturally There is male domination and female submission. When it is valued, then it is cherished and it's perpetuated, as in rape and war, both acts of violence. And so then I will bring up the chart, if you will, and then we'll reserve time for comments and questions and a discussion. So I request that there is active listening, that you listen very carefully, because this is not published in the Western literature. I learned the language of pathology only in order to teach what I know from oral tradition, not to exploit and victimize my own people. So do we have that chart ready? I see Gary, but I don't see the chart. I have it on my end too, and but I'm waiting to see if you can bring it up first.
Patricia, if you could try to bring it up.
Okay.
I'm having as up and down, like
Okay.
it might not fit the screen all the way. So let me
Okay.
see.
Well,
Let's see. Okay, there you
I
go.
grew up without telephone, without TV, without doll, without toys, without. I grew up on the Navajo reservation, and so I'm learning because I have to learn very fast. Can we? How do I center it on the page here? How do I?
I see it. Yeah, it's right there. We
Mhm.
just, you have to scroll like up and down because we can only see the top part of it. That was what was happening in my email too.
I see. Well, there's a way to do it, but no time for coaching here. You have an idea here. There is on this one page, there's a circle on the bottom, and you can see that it's a closed circle, and you can see the arrows going up. And I spoke to that, where I called it a planetary cosmic reverent revolution, the reframe out of where all resources are going from the bottom to the top, from the poor to the rich. And then you see the triangle going up and the triangle going down. And then there's a shaded area, pathway, and it says leveler, truth teller. So I know everyone here is a leveler and a truth teller, and it takes us to, and so this is not coming from English. This is just the most appropriate words over time, over a lifetime of the nature of the semantics of the English language that I could simplify and describe and define and illustrate. There is no straight translation from ceremonial language, because they're in two different thinking systems. So that's what is on this chart. The thinking system on the bottom is the win-lose, nobody wins, destructive and death-producing decision and outcome. And the pathway out of it is the ceremonial. I named it indigenous ceremonial change process. So number one is naming the out of balance condition. That's what you've done in your title. You have named all of the out of balance conditions that historically we are dealing with right now in the crisis, where we have lived and survived, and we can observe and we can witness that the things that I'm going to be speaking to are happening because there is confusion, doubt, fear for survival, fears the control and greed, and then there's hunger, poverty, disease, and premature death. Those are the consequences for the thinking system we are reframing out of. And so while I could say all of this to you I don't want to use the word in English, the Navajo language, because that's conversation. And people are really, some don't know that they don't know that are trapped and entrenched in this closed system. It's failure design, meaning that nobody wins. And then with European thinking. So naming the out of balance condition and the root cause, and I will be covering this. And then emptying, which we've had the beginning and the intention and the appropriate way to go about it is following how we have reverence and we have respect for our emptying without judgment, without punishment, and without condemnation. That's what emptying is. So once we identify the root cause, that is what deconstructs the symptoms. And then we're emptying. So the first one, we call it it's a diagnostic. And every single ceremony begins with diagnostic. You do that in your everyday life. You want to know what is out of balance. What isn't happening anywhere is what is the root cause and deconstructing the root cause. And then what doesn't even exist as a safe and supportive environment for emptying. We call that isko. That means talk about it, cry about it. We can dance and sing and chant and drum and throw up herbs and go in the sweat lodge, kache and zethnato. These are herbs that you can use in the sweat lodge for, we can sweat and we can vomit. And these are all the ways to empty. The word is isko. That emptying is a very sacred and special place where Western culture has not designed safe and supportive places. And that's what you have intended here. And then once that cleansing, purification, and deconstructing the root cause, the reframing is to what is the creative solution, the co-creative. Co-creative here, I'm referring to creator within creation simultaneously and with yourself and then with others. Because if we betray creator, we betray ourselves and we betray others. And so we reframe to creator, to self, and then to others for those corrections. And then there's the manifestation, bringing that to solution, the elegant solutions to our life application to manifest and to the practical application. So I'm going to go through what I have prepared for you. I went through what is the ceremonial change process, and while you're looking at the chart, then I will continue here, and then you can think about the comments and the questions that you want to bring to the group here. So, Einstein was the one who said, we cannot solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So that's referring to the illustration in the bottom part of the chart. And I'm going to move it up a little bit more so that the first one, naming, is one, the origin story. This is named the out of balance condition. The origin story historically sets up the female as the archetype of the seducer. You know that from Genesis and Adam and Eve and the snake. And then there's the Charter of Liberty. Notice it's called Charter of Liberty, and freedom and liberty and freedom sets the female up as property, because that Charter of Liberty, whatever century that was in from the Vatican, that identified the first laws of ownership of land and property, and women were included as property, which we're still following to this day. And third is Mary Parker Follett. Then she defined the word compromise. Let's not use the word compromise, because she was considered a she was considered an subversive in her day in the 1930s, and she was a leveler and a truth teller. So let's not use the word compromise. It's lose for everyone. So now going to the core issue, we're going to the root cause, and we're identifying the root cause of what I just spoke here that maintains the out of balance conditions. This is confusion between love and lust, because love is radiatory and lust is magnetic. So that's an energy of qualifying and misqualifying energy, because everything is energy. And the Western world doesn't make that distinction. What I'm using is called the art of making distinction. That takes us out of for and against, right and wrong, and good and bad. And it's the unifying principles of then what is a conflict of interest. So love is radiatory in that it's the energy coming through our crown chakra, our third eye, our through our 7 chakras, where we say yes and we agree to be a conduit. So radiatory means that that's a shield, and it's a protective shield, because truth is the only real power, and everyone is speaking. We're all speaking our truth. It's the only real power, and it is our protection. It's everyone's protection. And no human law and rule regulation can have power over the creator and creation. And yet people are being recruited to act as if that is going to happen. It's a conflict of interest, and the creator does not destroy. It's her or his, their own creation. So that's where the hope is for the healing of this planet, healing of all people, all nations. There's adversary and conflict from intrapersonal and interpersonal. So that means within us and between us, there's animosity and aggression set up by the male domination and female submission. That's a social engineering and conditioning. So when they say the man is the head of the household, that destroyed all the indigenous cultures on the especially on Turtle Island, because then that set up the male dominant, female submit as a healthy way to live, when it is actually causing the animosity and aggression within and between the male and the female. And then third, this is the where I'm identifying root causes of what I spoke of in the naming of out of balance conditions. So the win-lose is no win for everyone. It's destructive and death-producing decisions for those outcomes. So why are we allowing ourselves to be recruited to participate in our own demise? And then the next generation of youth, we are that's a war on children by recruiting them to participate in their own demise, in our own demise. Now we come to the emptying that I called Isko, is the maladaptive emotions that perpetuates the root cause. So if we're not identifying the root cause and deconstructing it, dismantling it, undoing it, cleansing it, purifying it by leveling and truth telling. And then it really requires us to make corrections by examining our unexamined assumptions. These unexamined assumptions we could call normalized pathology and groupthink. It just means that we think that it's okay, like our leaders who are in politics and how they talk to and treat women in their home, in their environment. That means their community and also in their political environment. Can people hear me?
Yes, I'm sorry. Someone accidentally unmuted themselves for just a second. There was some background static, but I muted them again. So you're good. Sorry.
And then we're down to what?
It is 11:30 a.m. Oh, sorry.
You have a half an hour. Patricia, we're at the half hour mark.
Okay.
Thank you. And there are a few questions. So whenever you're ready to answer those.
Yes. So I'm describing what you see on the chart that says Indigenous Ceremonial Change Process. I'm describing 1, 2, 3. So now I'm at 2. I'm at emptying maladaptive emotion that perpetuates the root cause. So if we do not deconstruct the root cause, we're doing that collectively here. We're in the ceremony that I'm describing to you. Everyone is participating. As I speak this, as you see the chart, it's not tomorrow, next week, or next year, or next century, or next generation. It's in the now. You're participating actively in everyone that's speaking their truth and has a witness. That is all we need to turn this back into the light that people have captured in the astral plane, the maladaptive thought forms that I called at a mega level, that we're doing this clearing right now. And I see like there's 10 people here. It could only just take 2 people anywhere and everywhere we go, that's speaking the truth and having a witness. And then we've undone, we've turned back into the light, and it can no longer be held by lies, because no matter how many somebody believes the lies or how long they believe the lies, they'll never be true. So I begin with, I said earlier, hear this. Historically, we know this. Historically, women and people of color have had to agree to lose and pay to lose. Now I'm going to go down the list. There's a distinction between the word in English, celibate and chaste. And I heard this from Catholic priests themselves who were trying to justify, they were pedophile perpetrators. And they said, we're celibate, but we're not chaste. So that's the art of making distinction that can justify perpetuating the maladaptive, meaning that then it's misqualifying life energy and procreation energy. Now I go down to the next one. There's a distinction as sex as procreation and sex as entertainment and as addiction. The next one, the definition of voyeurism is, colloquial language is peeping Tom. And the definition is sexual perversion in which children are the preferred, listen to this word, sexual object. Children are the sexual object. Not even human or humane. Specifically, a psychiatric disorder in which an adult has sexual fantasies about or engages in sexual acts with the prepubescent child. The next one is, this is an example of action of personal protection, of which I had suggested when there was a Navajo person in the Eugene, Ashland, Shasta area, who over so many years, the women were protecting this elderly Navajo man claiming to be a medicine man, whom I personally knew on the reservation before I ever went to the Northwest Coast, and was shocked to see him there, and people giving him a vehicle and checks for thousands of dollars, and recruiting women, and other women recruiting women for this person. Well, I told them, when someone finally broke silence, I told her, I said, write a written report to the Navajo Nation Medicine Man Association that's taking action for your own protection. And they just wouldn't do it for another, I don't know how many years, still rewarding this person and still providing travel and lodging and food and large amounts of money to this person. So when I went to the Medicine Man Association gathering, some of them are my clan. They are my Tachi and Kia'ani clan, the Gachigai. They're the president and the vice president, not currently, but in the past, of the Navajo Medicine Man Association. So I verbally named this person, and I said, this is what this person is doing over there. So I reported it for them. That's an example of what you do to protect yourself. And look at what's happening on our national scene with the courage that it takes to speak about our own experiences, about our family or our relatives or our friends, or just in general, some of the atrocities. And we can't just keep allowing that to happen to anybody, men and women, because I know men who have also are in this category of misconduct. They're perpetrating, but they're also victims. And then I'm just speaking to you of the rescuers, of all the rescuers, all the women rescuers. It baffles me that the victim will be the the enabler and rescuer of the perpetrator and the sexual predator. And that's what you see in the bottom chart. I don't have time to go in detail, but perhaps somebody has questions about it. But just going down to the next item here on the list. I spent time in Wilmot Federal Corrections in Tucson, Arizona. It's called Wilmot Federal Corrections Institute in Tucson, Arizona, where all of these men, they were mostly Native men and different tribes. They were under the influence of alcohol or other drugs at the time of their crimes. They were there for rape, which is, we call rape as sexual assault. They were there for torture, gang rape, and then murdering the woman. And so the chief psychologist brought me in there on a volunteer basis, and for the ceremony that you see here. And because there were many men, Navajo men there, even Apache people could understand somewhat. I could switch back and forth from English to the Nehpazad, which is explaining to them very simply, and they came out of it. They could come out of it in the prison. They were the least served people. And I just told them, I'm representing your mother, your sister, your aunt, your daughter, your nieces, your aunties, and so on. And they would just sit down and cry, pick up the cedar and the eagle feather and talk. So I'll go on. Then there's the whole issue of bondage bondage and slavery and sex trafficking. That's another mega issue. You might not know, or you might know about the missing and murdered Indigenous women and men that is coming to the public attention now. The missing and murdered Indigenous women and men. I personally know dear friend who's a male in that category. The next one is, this is under emptying the maladaptive emotions that perpetuate the root cause of the out of balance condition. Women are considered in some holy books, and this was told to me face to face, one-on-one, in one of those holy places that had one of those holy books, and said to me that women were considered as spoils, quote, spoils of war. Now I go on to realistic ideal reframing out of the inverse thinking system, which I called Pt.1, where maladaptive emotions result in enemy creation projected outward and polarizing people in perpetual adversary, conflict, warmongering, and warfare. So reframing into our thinking into the affirmative thinking system, Hojo, is that it's already built within us. It's not something you have to overcome. It's not something that is, it's going to happen someday when you learn about it and find out. When you get there, there's no there. It's built within. It's only saying yes or no to the consequences of those choices that I already defined. So Hojo is a Dene Azad term. It is the sacred language and words of the holy people. When I say holy people, I'm talking about collectively. All of our primordial ancestors were the precious child of the holy people of the Creator within creation, all simultaneously. And so it is this word Hojo is an all-encompassing eternal oneness where we equally exist in the holiness with H and wholeness with W, with Creator, within creation, within the natural order, spiritual law that governs us equally. Very quickly, spiritual natural order is east, south, west, north, spring, summer, fall, winter, child, youth, adult, elder, parent, and grandparent, and so on. I'll move on here. That's the natural order context. That's the container in which we're all born into. We exist eternally. No one can exist outside of our separate, but if they think they do, they're the ones destroying themselves and trying to destroy us, humanity, and the environment, and Mother Earth. And we're putting us in peril, but they cannot succeed. So when we're reframing right now, we're in the process of reframing out of the male and female life script. So the system is perpetrator. The perpetrator sets up the victim to fail and then blames the victim and then says, you owe me, like you overdraw. And the bank says, well, you owe me. So definition of the system as a perpetrator is to set the victim up to fail and then blame them, blame shifting, and then collect taxes, late fees, punishment, jail time, prison time, even death, all the forms of ways of collecting. So these are life script on the bottom circle there of perpetrator. Then the predator. Those are businessmen and lawyers who help the perpetrator win. And then that's where the sexual predators are. Enabler and rescuers are health and human services. I worked there 20 years, behavioral health, mental health, social services. And I could speak reams about it, but for our purposes here, that's unhealthy helping. It's helping people. It's the hero savior. It's an addiction to hero savior. And it's the unhealthy helping of helping people to stay the way they are. And I'm here to teach, be helping between male and female, get out of the male dominate and female submit, and into a healthy helping life task, healthy helping life task, teamwork. And so then there's the victim. You can see where that's external oppression, internal oppression, and depression and being immobilized. And you see the top circle, there's an opening there. That's the ceremonial change process. There's always a way. You make a way. Creator and within creation has made a way for us. We don't corner ourselves. We don't corner each other. That's where suicide is, where it says victim. You can see at the bottom there. And then there is then the persecutor, the judge, the court, the police, the jail, the prison. And so the victim, then what we have is domestic violence in the home and lateral violence in the workplace, the community, the society, and in the governments, in the world governments. So we're reframing now. Remember and reawaken to the male life task, not life script, male life task of protector, provider, restoring authentic feelings, not the maladaptation, not the maladaptive emotions of hate, envy, greed, jealousy, anger, shame, guilt, fear, and lust, not the maladaptive emotions, but restoring our authentic feelings of love, joy, and peace, and happiness. And a healthy helping teamwork with the female life task as the life giver and nurturer. So we're calling them the men who take care of the outside, the territory, they're not behind, and the men who take care of the inside, the hunters, the medicine people, so on. They are not Ani, the providers. So men who take care of the outside, men who take care of the inside, the protector, provider, they guarantee, they ensure there is no hunger, poverty, sickness, and premature death. And there's so much to say there, but I have to move on to number 4, the co-creative solutions, manifesting the win-win co-creative solutions by accessing our creative imagination, design peacemaking strategies for collective survival. So we design safe and supportive spaces and places for emptying without judgment, condemnation, punishment, and using the indigenous ceremonial change process, which is a sequencing. And we realize there's a self-realization of our own spiritual identity as a precious child of Creator within creation. Equally, all of us, it's inclusive. And then affirming our spiritual identity as a male protector and as a female life giver and nurturer. So we have that within us, and then we have that between male and female. That's where the healing has to take place in order to get out of the male dominate, female submit that leads to rape and war and the pillaging, the invasion and genocide, mass murder and plunder and mass theft of nations. And so we speak in the affirmative and not from our deficient self-image. So the perpetrator has a doing wound. They're equally wounded. The perpetrator has a doing wound. The victim has a being wound. And there are only 2 addictions. The more pleasure, the more pain. There's people who get pleasure from inflicting pain, and there's people who are addicted to receiving the pain because they're going to earn some reward from it. And so we have the practical application. We're to 5 now. Initiate co-creative situational leadership for decision-making within and between emphatic. Empathy. I'm being emphatic right here, but it's between empathetic coalitions, and also we need to implement co-creative solutions in our action planning. That means group consensus for designing the co-creative solution. So we have protection and healing ceremonies for what is called, I'm going to name it in our language. It says, Belagana says that's what it is. That's the sickness between the confusion of lust and love. And it's infectious, and it's it's a slang word. And Belagana means people who use their five senses as a weapon against themselves and other. And then the other word is describing that confusion and that infectious sickness that I've already described, all the ways that people are recruited to that thinking system and trapped and entrenched in that bottom circle there. Now, so we must intend, visualize, affirm, make decisions, and put into action what is the affirmative, that we're all equally a precious child of Creator within creation. And then I'm looking at the time here. Looks like 12 minutes. So let's inspire, let's motivate, let's educate, let's encourage living the loving way as a way of life, as a male protector and provider, and as a female life giver and nurturer. And so I'm going to read this list to you, that what I'm saying and what I'm teaching of my lifetime work is, it's not religion, it's not philosophy, it's not academic theory, it's not Western science, it's not alternative medicine, it's not New Age, it's not superstition, not coping mechanisms, because it's not Western counseling definitive, Western conventional definitive counseling and therapeutic modalities, such as what they call catharsis, which is venting, ranting, blaming, and scapegoating. So we need to stay out of there. We need to empty in a safe and supportive environment without judgment, punishment, or condemnation, because Gloria has created this Zoom event to initiate this within the culture that has no place. There's no place to go for this, because now we have misconduct of rascal gurus. They're called in the literature, rascal gurus of any group. And so what the indigenous ceremonial change process is, what it is indigenous science, quantum physics. It's in the natural order, spiritual laws, ceremonial healing process and practice. And it requires deconstructing the root causes of the out of balance condition. So very simply, it's a decision-making process. It's yes or no. And you see it right there on the chart that you're going to choose. And when you learn to not listen to the criminal mind who uses thinking for what it's not for, but listen to your sacred self-intellect and know what to say yes and no to. And you can intuit this. It's not me that knows all this. There's no secret. And healing is for everyone. And there's no healing and blaming. And so you can intuit it because it's common sense. And now we have a little bit of time for comment, question, and let's hear it.
Thank you so much, Patricia. It's such an honor to have you here and to hear from you. There were a couple questions in the comments. I'm just going to scroll back, and one of them was from Rosetta Joanne. She asked respectfully, why does it say deserving poor? And she's referencing your chart.
Yes, thank you, Rosetta, because most people, that's the first place, that's the first one they want answered. That's the first one. What does that mean? That means that the deserving poor, they will capture you by addiction, by diagnosing you as mentally ill, or incarcerating people it's a laundering of money. It's using people for contracting to private industry, and there are 5 of them, and then or homeless. So those are artificially inflicted in the bottom circle, that's the only way you can stay alive, is that you can get sick and you can go in the hospital and they'll give you antibiotics and they'll kill all your microbiome. And then they'll just give you unhealthy food. And then you're not feeding your nutrition, you're feeding the parasites, you're feeding the addiction, and they'll take all your money and put you in the grave. As long as you qualify and you're diagnosed, if you want to be taken care of immediately, you just go to social services and say, I'm one of these categories, and you sign all the papers, and then any money that you get then goes back to the system. It goes back to the top. That's called laundry of money, using people to justify through contracting. And I don't have time to, it's a whole topic in and of itself. And the undeserving poor, you see that where it says persecutor, all the levelers and truth tellers. When you're a leveler and truth teller, then the perpetrator, the predator, the rescuer, the enabler, the victim, and the real persecutors in the system will all say, when you tell the truth, you're persecuting us. And that's happening big time in the politics right now. When we serve in the world by making the decision for the greatest good for the greatest number of people, and we call that justice, then someone says, wait a minute, when you are doing an injustice to us. And I hope you hear the twistedness of it. And I'm just going to call it sorcery.
Thank you, Patricia. Rosetta, do you feel that was a good response? You have any deeper need there?
That answered it fully, but actually it made me have way more questions, but it's going to get way off topic. But thank you so much for explaining. You're a great explainer, and you planted some new seeds of consciousness in me, because now what you just told me there just shifted my whole reality in my past, and I'm putting pieces together. So thank you so much. I'm just getting so much information. It's overwhelming.
Let me just say right here that I also use the art of making a distinction between, I don't use the word consciousness. I use the word conscience and collective conscience and moral reasoning, because our word for the creative imagination and conscience is whole brain thinking. It's eholzen, which is holy thinking. That's the appropriate function of our thinking. Because if you use consciousness and then reality is relative to your perception, everybody has using their consciousness and looking at something, and then everyone is using their perception. It requires a conversion process. This does not require a conversion process to take away and replace it with something else. See, that's what happened to us Indigenous people in conversion, is take away the sacred self and our sacred place in the universe and replace it with the deficient self-image that has to be remediated by some external remediation process like evolution and enlightenment, even schooling. I'm going to use schooling, not education, because schooling is not education. It's programming. And then personal salvation and redemption. That's the external remediation process to those end states. And that's what causes delay, because it's false teaching. It causes delay by false prophets. And then delay causes the suffering. I don't use conscious and consciousness. I use conscience.
Thank you for clarifying for that.
But so you see, I gave you an example that is not coming from English. It's not coming from psychiatry or psychology or anything in English. I'm just describing, defining, illustrating from the word eholzen, holy thinking. The appropriate function of our whole brain thinking is conscience and moral reasoning, which is reality is exact. Whereas with consciousness and perception, it's relative to your perception. So there's no spiritual, there's no morality.
So conscious is like the pure form, and consciousness is the process of getting to conscience. Kind of, is that?
No, no. When I say art of making distinction, consciousness is you're trapped and entrenched. Like you don't know that you don't know you're trapped and entrenched in the bottom circle. If you're trying to say that consciousness leads us to conscience, no, we only have conscience built into us.
Okay, this is why I got to keep asking questions. I got to get this right.
Because that's a reframe, that's a conflict of interest, that when you use consciousness, then reality is relative to your perception. It requires conversion, and that's why everyone will be trying to convert to their version of religion or philosophy or theory or whatever it is that you have to take away and replace your own, and that's why you will never get group consensus. But if you look in the bottom circle at that line going horizontally, it perpetually polarizes people into adversary and conflict. And then that polarization, that's like recruiting people to gang up onto someone else, which is happening big time. And then war. And then that is the second action, that not only is the polarizing happening into adversary and conflict, it is escalating into war.
Thank you, Patricia. Thank you so much. We are reaching the end of your hour, and I'm feeling like it's not long enough.
I told you at the beginning.
Yeah. We should have started you sooner, but what I'm suggesting is I've wanted many times to do more work with you, and this is the first time I've seen your presentation in this form. We did have a phone call years ago, and you really helped me when I was in a really bad state. And you shared with me some reflections from this model, but now I'm seeing it here and I'm seeing it more deeply. So I'd love to do some work with you in the future and create a live Zoom just for you. I know we've talked about doing that, and then we can go into this teaching more deeply and bring more people in. And with that also, I just want to share an invitation of Patricia is an Indigenous elder, and she does these offerings. She does these teachings, from the goodness of her heart. And she's not asking me to say this, but if anybody is feeling inspired to offer Patricia any form of donation, of contribution for her time and her energy and her wisdom, I know that would be greatly appreciated by her. This is a free event, and this is a one-time thing that you'll hear me saying this throughout the entire event. But I just want to make that suggestion as an offer. And then also, Patricia, we have some people asking if they can receive a copy of this chart, and with your permission, I can put it on the Facebook event page. So I would just ask if we have permission to share this on the Facebook event page, and then what would be a good way that people can send you a contribution for your wisdom if they're inspired, and or how to stay in touch with you.
Well, first, let me please note that life is not all give and not all take. It's like in breath and out breath. And while you're using the word, quote, donation, in our culture, it's not really being followed today, but the medicine people take care of the community, and the community take care of the medicine people, which is it's reciprocal. So the word we have, if it's my offering, we use an English offering, because donation sounds like a charity. And certainly I don't have retirement having worked in high levels of management with corrupt men, because I'm a whistleblower. And so offering is an appropriate word. I do have Zelle and PayPal. currently.
Beautiful. If you might put that down in the chat for us, it would be awesome for some reciprocity to go in your direction. And was that a yes on the sharing of your chart?
I'm totally transparent because I said I'm not selling secrets, and there are no secrets.
Okay.
This is my accountability, and my transparency is I give and share day and night, 24 hours. I've spent my whole lifetime sitting up all night to the fire with my parents and my clan relatives, and now it's, I've only done that one time with the people in Amazon on Zoom. So yes, of course.
Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to stop the sharing of the screen. Thank you. Thank you so much, Patricia. Yeah, just go ahead and write in the chat how people can send you some reciprocity. I'll share the chart on the Facebook page, and it is our next hour. So we have in the room our beautiful sister Lorena Manzanita. I hope I'm saying correctly, fully your name. And this sister will be sharing with us her topic, which is Seeking Safety and Healing, a Sexual Trauma Survivor's Guide to Safety and Healing in Psychedelic Healing Spaces. Just for one moment prior to her sharing, I'm just going to share a brief reminder to everyone who's here in the space I'm going to copy and paste again our safe space agreements in the chat. If you've just gotten into the room, please check these agreements over, especially with these topics are very sensitive. So I'm going to post that here and pass it over to you, Lorena. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for facilitating. Honored to be in this room with you all. Can you do me a favor, Astaria, and make me a co-host so I can share my screen?
Yes, we have you as a co-host, actually.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Let me do the thing. Sure. All right. Before we begin, I'd love to just collectively breathe together. I'm a fan of breathing. I'm a fan of grounding, getting into our bodies. Thank you for Patricia. Thank you for downloading your wisdom. May we have the capacity to be present to all that truth that got stirred, and keep present in an open-hearted space as we bravely, courageously lean into truth in some really hard and painful topics. So thank you all for showing up in this space, in whatever capacity you're here. Yeah, my name is Lorena Manzanita. I'm a sex and relationship coach. Oh, let me turn the page here. I'm a sex and relationship coach. I'm somatically oriented, which means I'm a big fan of the connection between mind and body. Very interested in not just intellectual truths, but truths that could be found in the heart, truths that could be found in the body, ways of regulating ourselves, being present, being connected, attuned, coherent, that honors the body's wisdom. So my background is as a somatic experiencing trauma resolution practitioner. I'm also trained in a modality called psychedelic somatic interactional psychotherapy. I'm a facilitator of that work, although just to be clear, I'm not a psychotherapist. Just happens to be a branding issue with that particular title. What else to say about my work? I work with a lot of people with sexual trauma histories. And in the psychedelic spaces, in the medicine work I do, a lot of that trauma surfaces to ask for healing, connection, acknowledgement, support in moving through in a good way. And so in the presence of so much trauma, I just felt called to be here, to acknowledge that there's healing potential and also potential for harm in psychedelic healing spaces. So as somebody who works with a lot of sexual trauma survivors, I thought I might add some insight and support to help people navigate and make choices for greater safety and healing. So that's why I'm here. So let's just get a little oriented to the reality of sexual trauma. This is an American-oriented view of the statistics here, but I don't have a global view, at least in these statistics. But nonetheless, this is too much sexual trauma. Every 73 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted. 20% of adults report being sexually abused as children. More than 90% of child survivors are sexually abused by someone they know and trust. It's highly underreported. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men experience sexual violence involving physical contact during their lifetimes. So let's just breathe with that. That's painful. That's a reality that we navigate in, whether or not you live in America. Like, some degree of sexual violence is happening in this world. And just naming that, I'm noticing like a certain amount of tension in my jaw and like a clench in my fists. If we are to like really show up for the reality of sexual trauma in our worlds, we need to like show up for like what's goes on in our bodies when we turn our awareness towards this truth. So maybe just taking a moment to breathe, feel into your body, feel how your nervous system relates to this information. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see. Oops. So why seek healing with medicine work? Did I hear some words? Did somebody want to speak?
I think someone just unmuted themselves on accident though, but I muted them again.
Okay, very good. Daria, can you do me a favor? I have a trouble like tracking the chat and like tracking myself, tracking the screen and all the business. So if you could do me a favor, and like if there's like a something that shows up in the chat, like you feel like would be a good idea for me to like call attention to in the present moment, please like interrupt me. Otherwise, I'm just kind of gotta go in the flow, and at the end of the piece, I'll have a Q&A, and so we can discuss things then.
Great.
Is that
Perfect.
something we can do? Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so why seek healing with medicine work? So there's all sorts of reasons. I'm gonna like stay a little closer to what happens in the space that I hold. I'm not going to necessarily speak to ceremonial contexts, group medicine work, all sorts of different contexts that are kind of out of the scope of my normal way of working. So I'll just speak to what happens in like one-on-one healing containers that I hold. So the medicine work can bring unintegrated and repressed memories, traumatic memories, up into a healing container. So ideally, you have a healing container that's healing versus harmful, right? Well, I'll speak more to like how to find healing containers and cultivate those. Because like bringing up a repressed traumatic memory can be unfortunately re-traumatizing if it's not held well. But if held well, it can be a way of like reworking those traumas in a profound way. Like so many times in a sexual trauma survivor's history, their truth was unacknowledged, right? There was some sort of dynamic where the perpetrator, the abuser, had a certain amount of power over them. And in that power structure, and in that power dynamic, truth wasn't allowed to be shared in a significant way. And there was a certain amount of dismissal, denial, unacknowledgement, lack of acknowledgement. And then so bringing up repressed traumatic memories within a context where you're being heard, validated, your emotions are being like supported and as true, as valid, letting them move through in a significant way with like heart and presence and compassion available. That is such a beautiful thing. It rewires the nervous system and makes our reality all the more real. I can't, like, so many sexual trauma survivors have a way of like replaying the original trauma in some ways where there's that like quality of dismissal that was a part of the original trauma. And then so more we can like acknowledge our truth, the better. So in these healing containers, you can bring up resources and support to bring resources and support to those painful memories. You can also help process those traumas more effectively. So the containers I hold are very somatically oriented. I'm a big fan of letting like the body express protective strategies that weren't allowed or like didn't properly move through. So like lately, my personal trauma healing that involves a certain amount of abuse in my childhood, I have been like kicking and screaming and pounding and running and like screaming no. And oh my God, it's so freaking satisfying. It is so empowering to let the body fully reclaim its power. So like you can deep dive into this traumatic material with the support of the medicine that helps surface up unconscious stuff. And then if you've got a container that honors the wisdom of the body to move through this material, on the other side, glorious empowerment and triumph. I'm a big fan. Not always the case. Sometimes it takes a while to get there, and not all healing containers can
Okay.
I'm hearing voices. Is that intentional or is that like an oopsie unmuted mic?
Accident, I believe. Yeah.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so but depending on the context, surfacing this material can bring witness, community, and corrective experiences. Yeah, so that's why.
Am I allowed to interrupt to ask a question?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So a healing container is what a person that is holding space. It's kind of like that.
Yeah. So there's different types of containers. I'm going to go a little into some considerations around various containers. It could be like just solo, you in your room. It could be a one-on-one. It could be one-on-one work or one-on-two, or it could be a group context. I have more experience on the one-on-one and solo level, so I'll speak to some of those things. But yeah, but a healing container ideally is like safe. There's healthy boundaries. There's support. Might be just the support of your environment, the support of your intentions, the support of all the preparation you brought into the space. It could be the support of the people nearby. Yeah, like you are a creator, and you can create the container that's healing for you. And you could also seek out support from guides, resources, people who have experience, and they can also bring their intelligence and wisdom and heart and compassion into the field. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for asking. Okay, so there is this like messed up pattern that like that happens when like as a victim of trauma, it's not just sexual trauma, but as a victim of trauma, there are ways that we are impacted that make us even more vulnerable to more trauma. It's like it's a horrible cosmic setup in some ways. It's also like on a very neutral level. It's just kind of like how the nervous system works. I'm coming from that particular background as a nervous system geek. And it's just something that we need to like acknowledge as a possibility. And so be mindful of like when you're in the selection process, when you are cultivating your container, when you're like choosing guides and allies, it's helpful to be like mindful of the reality that like our sexual trauma symptoms can make it difficult to seek safety. Okay, so some of the sexual trauma symptoms could be struggles with shame and self-worth, right? So being subject to painful circumstances from our caregivers, from people who are supposed to support us and keep us alive and keep us healthy, when those people can have like hurt us in some ways, the childlike mind will, rather than say that that caregiver is wrong or bad because we depend on them for our survival, will internalize stories of we're not good enough. Something about us is wrong or bad. And then so if you've got that felt sense of I'm not worthy of goodness, something about me is wrong, then it's like it kind of messes with your picker. You're more likely to choose situations and people that resonate with that experience of shame and self-worth, a low self-esteem. Yeah, I just felt like a moment of like holding that with compassion, because that really sucks that we could be wired that way. And that's kind of how it works. So it's important to be mindful of that potential, feel into like really like building up your self-esteem. And I'll say more about like if you have a like not so great picker, some ways of like taking care of yourself and seeking some support. So another thing that happens with trauma, some trauma symptoms, is like we foreclose our self-protective strategies. So I talked about like my trauma. There's like under the guise of corporal punishment, I experienced a lot of hitting in my childhood. So in my most recent profound medicine journey, there's been a lot of like punching and kicking and protective mechanisms. So those things within me, those like protective mechanisms for a good chunk of my life were not available. I couldn't say no. I didn't know how to like get out of an unhealthy, toxic relationship for a good chunk of my life, right? That was a learned skill. So a certain amount of self-inquiry, self-reflection, tuning in. How good are you at like getting out of relationship dynamics that aren't good for you? If you find yourself repeatedly stuck in unhealthy relationship patterns, then like have some compassion for yourself for like your flight instincts not being totally online. If you have trouble like fighting or like saying no and like speaking up for your boundaries, and have a tendency to go into fawn or freeze, know that about yourself. Again, I'm going to speak to like if some of these are true for you, what to do, what some options might be moving forward. But a certain amount of self-awareness to know your vulnerabilities can be really helpful. Challenges in knowing and naming your needs. So if you grew up in a context or you had a really intense situation where your needs weren't acknowledged, where they're overridden, and then that was kind of like imprinted in you in some way, it could be difficult to know what your needs are, name them, advocate for them, receive them. So if that's challenging in your cycle, in your system, like, again, some intention around working with that. And then so difficulties in identifying boundaries, prone to overriding and codependency. So all of those patterns of trauma make us, unfortunately, hella vulnerable for more trauma. Right. And then so bringing some awareness to that, bringing some compassion to that, knowing that your filter might be a little distorted, and then making some choices with an awareness that that might be true for you. So container options and considerations. So solo, we spoke of that, Rosetta. You asked a little bit about this. So this is the slide I was referencing. So a solo container, that could be you, home alone, bedroom, creating like ceremonial space, writing or like journal options, like movement space. It could be as simple as eye mask and music in your ears. It could be like I need to move, so I'm gonna have like dance floor space or a bed that I can like roll around on. What else is like helpful for solo? It's also helpful to like have people in the field that you can like call on a lifeline if you're like get into a bit of trouble. There's a Fireside Project. They're a resource where they offer peer support, psychedelic, somebody's on the other line to help you through a hard spot, or if you need some integration support. So that could be like a lifeline, or if you've got like a good friend somewhere in the field, or like, hey, honey, I'm going to go on a psychedelic journey soon. If I call you, if I'm in a hard spot, will you be available for me? So having some people in the field to support you is a good idea. If you, I'm also a huge fan of like starting slow and low. So I don't recommend going for heroic doses. Do your research around this medicine, whatever medicine you have in mind. Know your dosing. Start conservative. See how your body and emotional system responds to the particular medicine. You want to have a certain amount of resource, like witness capacity. You want to have some degree of executive functioning to get your body to the bathroom. Recently, like took a bit too much medicine. It was like a it was like a normal dose for my particular body, but it was like with a new psilocybin strain that I hadn't experienced before. And I found myself kind of like stuck on the floor in front of the bathroom, unable to like get my ass up and take care of myself. So like, I was a little ambitious. I didn't know the medicine well. I recommend knowing your medicine, starting low, even if it's like a medicine you're somewhat familiar with, even if it's a new strain, if it's a new source, like start low. If you've got a certain amount of sexual trauma and you have difficulty self-regulating yourself in general, in your normal waking life, I would highly recommend at least having a sitter, or doing really small doses. And don't recommend like big doses, big stuff comes up. If you don't have a container that can hold it, then you can like have a bad trip and it'll be hard to recover from, or it might not be hard to recover from. But it like, let's try and avoid suffering if possible, right? So one-on-one, that would be like, on kind of lighter end of the spectrum, it's like a friend sitting with you. On another end of the spectrum, it's like hiring a facilitator where you do a certain amount of preparation work, go on for a deep medicine dive, and then a certain amount of integration work. How I work, I have an above ground practice. With this particular modality, I work with cannabis and ketamine, and people source their own medicines, which is a level of safety for me that I need in order to be totally present with people. So how I work is I'll do like a certain amount of preparation. I want to establish trust and safety with my client. I want their bodies to know that I'm a trustworthy person. I want to know how their nervous system works, what their boundaries are, what their core traumas are, all sober in an above ground context. I'm developing relationship with this person. And then we go into a dive with medicine and then see how that works. And then we'll like reflect on that. And then if it's like, if they've got a certain amount of capacity, then we'll go on a deeper dive, right? So I space mine out, my medicine work out with like non-medicine relational support. So that's like some one-on-one context. If you are working underground with somebody, if you're working with somebody you don't know particularly well, I do recommend like getting to know their like what systems are they embedded in. And I'm going to unpack this a bit more moving forward, but this is just kind of like a little touch in. So for group work, the Chacruna Institute, chacruna.net, they have a Chronicles section where they talk about, it's called Sex and Power. And in that Sex and Power section, with a bunch of different articles in there, they do have a listing for a PDF of like how to seek, how to like create safety and use discernment when seeking support in ayahuasca ceremonies. It's really well done. I think that's like has a lot of good tips for seeking support in ceremonial context, whether or not it's in with ayahuasca, no matter the medicine. I think like there's a lot of good tips there around how to assess for safety. And if it's a recreational context, again, low and slow, use small doses of medicine, preferably. I personally, like, I'm not a fan of like, especially if you've got a sexual trauma history, going into group recreational spaces with medicine in the system, that like distorts my capacity to find my accurate yeses and nos and healthy boundaries. So I'm not a fan of substances where sexuality is on the table with substances. In general as my policy, but if I do, and sometimes I do, I'll do small doses. So know yourself, know your medicine, I do recommend like having clear, identifying like your boundaries and your yeses and nos in a sober space, naming that to the participants or people you're close to in that field. And then like, yeah, see what happens. Take care of yourself. Make sure you've got friends and allies in the field. Okay, so what are some green flags around finding safety when you're assessing a practitioner or assessing a situation? I would want them to be curious about your boundaries and capacities. Everybody's different. Like some people can handle a certain amount of intimacy. Some people have a certain amount of resources online. I want to know what those are, so I know what their edges are when they're working with me. So if somebody you're working with doesn't have much curiosity around what your boundaries and capacities are, that's questionable. So like the more they're curious about your background, your trauma history, your resources, your yeses and nos, the better. Are they positioning themselves as like a fellow human on this healing journey with their own like wounds and learning curves and like a sense of humility? Awesome. That's great. That's more of a green flag, in my opinion. Are they positioning themselves as a savior, as a rescuer, as somebody who's like transcended this human experience? Questionable, right? Yeah. So yeah, green flag, hold themselves as human, have prepared themselves in a good way to hold space. Do they empower you? Do they offer choices and options? If you set a boundary with them, how do they respond to that boundary? Do they celebrate it? Do they say, thank you for taking care of yourselves? Or do they like hold a position of authority and like push you and like say something about you is wrong for holding that boundary? Questionable, right? So how connected are they? How well do you know this guide? Are they like a practitioner that's well known in your community? That can get a little tricky if they're like a practitioner or a healer kind of guru type, and they've got like, they're well known in your community, but there's kind of this clear power differential where like there's a bunch of people underneath them, and all the people underneath them are saying, oh, this person is amazing, versus like, you know, somebody on the more horizontal plane of their kind of like power level, and or are aware of people that are like above them and count for them. I'm not sure if this makes sense. But like you want to like be able to locate where they exist in a social web tracking power differentials. So the more kind of horizontal information and vertical information you get about this person, like the better, in terms of like how, like that says something about how they're held accountable. Right. And so in terms of red flags, I basically was already doing that with what I just shared. So there's the green flags and then there's red flags. One red flag that I might have not totally mentioned, two of them here. Special treatment. This is mentioned in the Chacruna PDF around assessing for safety in certain psychedelic spaces. Like, do they make you feel special? This could also be true in like a legitimate psychotherapeutic context. Legitimate meaning like, well, psychotherapists can also be wounded. Hello, true. There's been established, like there can be a pattern of like telling somebody that they're special and then kind of like making that person like a little different, or creating some buffers between that person and other people. There's something a little dodgy and creepy about that can lead towards questionable behavior. Are they complimenting your looks? Are they singling you out in a certain way? I know it's super compelling to be held as special, but there's going to be something a little unsafe about that dynamic. So you want to be tracking that. Already mentioned like human versus savior. So guru complex, I'm in general not a huge fan. It sets up power differentials that are like harder to hold somebody accountable in that context. Are they boundary unaware? So we're talking about like sexual safety, and but like even in the subtle like lead up to going deep diving with medicine, you can track some things about like a person's boundaries. It's like, how do they keep time? Do they communicate around what's like on the menu of options, not on the menu of options? Do they like do little subtle things around touching you or saying things that are a little like, were they tracking my boundaries? So you want to be like sensitive to how this person is tracking boundaries. If you have got a sexual trauma history where you've had a lot of boundary violation, there might be a chance that your capacity to track somebody's capacity to track boundaries is a little off. And then so it could be helpful. I'm going to talk about like interview questions and ways you might loop somebody somebody that you can trust into the equation to help us like discern more effectively. Is this a safe person? Is this a safe container? And then social disconnect. I already kind of like mentioned, like, how can you locate this person in the social matrix? The more isolated they are, like, do they come out of nowhere? And could they like easily like drop off of the map if something off happened, something wrong went down? Like, you'll want to like be able to track that. All right, moving on. So if you are considering one-on-one work and if your picker is not great, I would recommend asking people you know and trust, healthy-ish people, for recommendations. I'd also recommend starting your healing journey in an above ground container without medicine, because medicine creates a certain power differential. If you start off in like some sort of like trauma informed therapeutic context without medicine, then you get certain capacities online that help you get more effective at discerning situations and people, like trying to figure out, like, are they safe? Are they not safe? But also, like, there's many practitioners who aren't just super medicine focused. They've got, and this would be my preference, for you to work with somebody who's got like lots more skills than just like I hold medicine space. Like, you want to like see what their background is. Do they have like a touch skills background? Do they have like good grounding in other therapeutic modalities that aren't super dependent on medicine? So like test run working with them in a non-medicine space and see how do they check out with all those green flags, red flags situation, right? Interview them. I'm going to suggest some interview questions moving after somewhere beyond this slide. Consider having someone who has healthy boundaries help you discern and sort through information. So like a healthy boundaries, I would say like somebody you know who has a capacity to like say yes to situations that are good for them, people that are good for them, no to situations that are not good for them, like can enter and exit relationships in a good way. So if you know people like that in your life, and you can lean on them, I would ask them to like help you process, is this a good person to work with? Might even ask them to be in the space. If you're working in an underground context and you're working kind of like in a home environment, not a bad idea to have like a friend in the field close by. So there's another layer of accountability happening. It might be a little tricky. Like some practitioners, might have like a space considerations that are a little challenging to have another person in the field. But like, it's not a bad idea to just ask the practitioner and see how they respond to the situation. That is also kind of data mining. Yeah. And
Now,
yes.
hi. There's a question, just before we go too far from it. Rosetta asked, what is above ground and underground?
Oh, so legal, illegal, basically. So, like I said, I work in an above ground context. I'm in California. Marijuana is legally available here. In Oregon, they're starting to do psilocybin health services. So it is an legal context. Colorado, they've got some new laws where it's also a legal context for working with medicine. So since I work with cannabis in California, I can like freely advertise my business, and also people can call me. There's more visibility. I'm like more trackable in a social context in the kind of web of connections versus illegal. There's a certain, you kind of need to like be less visible because of the sad state of affairs around legality or with working with medicine. Eventually, like MDMA will be held in a legal context through FDA approval. Yeah. That answer your question?
Yes. So I was working with a shaman in Mexico by accident. I know it's a long story. And then I ended up back in Canada 6 months ago, and I was having problems with my son. So I brought the shaman friend and asked him to help my son. But while he was here, he left medicine with me and said that I was ready. And so I'm just wondering, so I'm going to be an underground one because I'm doing frog medicine, Sapo and combo in Canada.
Okay.
So that's or is that above ground? Is that, I don't know, because I haven't administered any yet, and I'm like, I don't know if it's even legal.
Yeah, so this context, it's more of like trying to assess the safety of a practitioner.
Versus I'm
so
like the content of the medicine.
So the context in which this person practices influences the degree of accountability this person can be held to. So, and then solo journeys, not so much, this material isn't so relevant to solo work or self-administered work.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying.
Sure. And thank you, Astaria, for tracking that. So yeah, going slow. I'm a big fan of going slow to create safety. So here are some interview questions you might want to bring to a practitioner if you're considering working with them. What's your preparation process like? Again, are they tracking your capacities? Are they getting some information about your background? Are they like curious about your boundaries and limitations? Are they like taking some time to develop some support and connection and get to know you, preferably without medicine prior to going under? What's your training and background? So yeah, I mean, the more background, more training that they have, the more you can like reference who they've worked with, and the more reputable, more trustworthy those trainings, those lineages might be, the better, right? You might ask them, what's your experience in working with sexual trauma? So somebody might have like a great background and solid preparation process, but if they've got very little experience in working with sexual trauma, they might not be able to hold you as well as somebody who does have sexual trauma in their history. So you want to get an assessment of what their capacities are and what their experience is in working with sexual trauma. How do you approach consent? Ask that. See where they go with that. Are they sensitive to both verbal and nonverbal cues around yeses and nos? Are they reading body language? What's your approach to touch? Right. So in my practice, I am a sex and relationship coach. I am pleasure positive. I am sex positive. But I don't bring my erotic energy into a touch field with my clients, not with medicine on board, right? So you want to like see what is their experience with touch. How do they bring it? When do they not bring it? How would you handle it if I started pulling on you for sexual engagement? So a lot of people with sexual trauma histories, they're like the people who depended on for their survival. Used them for sexual gratification. And so there's this really unfortunate wiring around sexual attention means safety and security. Right. And so in a one-on-one context, some of that programming might arise up in me, and I might want to try and pull on my practitioner for some sexual attention, because that's how I got safety back in the day. And so it's important to like see how to like get a sense of how a practitioner might hold that with healthy boundaries. Like not ideally, they're not shaming, but they're also holding a clear boundary. What would you do if I became erotically aroused? Certain medicines that might come forward. So does that practitioner have the capacity to be present for that versus get kind of like pulled into that? So you can ask that question and see how their system, how they respond. Look, track their like facial expressions, right? So with sexual boundary violation in the recovery process, in the repair process, in our healing process, more often than not, you're going to need a period of being able to express your anger, being able to express your fear, being able to like protect yourself in some sort of way. You want a practitioner that can hold that with a certain amount of like presence and resiliency without getting like blown out by some of that energy coming in their direction, especially if like the practitioner is the same gender or sexual orientation of the person who might have violated you, right? So like in my work, I consent to, and I build up to having people I work with project some of, like intentionally, consciously project some of the thoughts, feeling like material of their former violators onto me. And there's a whole way of working with that. Ideally, they have training around that. But you want to get a sense of like, can that person hold that? Do they have enough ego resiliency to be, and orientation and training to be able to hold that in a good way? All right. What else do I have? So here are some of the resources that you want to check out. Chacruna, psychedelicsomatic.org. That's the training that I did. Also, I did a somatic experiencing training. That's traumahealing.org. These are not like this one is not psychedelic specific. This one obviously is. I talked about preparation. If you're doing a solo journey, like loading yourself with lots of good information, resources, skills before you do a solo journey. So this could be a resource for you, Healing Sexual Trauma Workbook, somatically oriented. Like I said, I'm a fan of somatics. Yeah, Okay, here we are. Question and answer phase. So I'm aware that I totally ignored the chat. I was relying on you, Astaria, to like help me bring attention to things that were immediately available. But I'll open up the table or the space for anybody who's got a question at this point that they want to verbalize. This audio channel, and then we'll start looking at this chat questions. Is any Astari, are you speaking? I'm seeing your.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your beautiful presentation and yeah, your offering and showing up, and it was the perfect contribution to this overall conversation. So thank you for bringing this aspect of this voice. I don't personally have any questions, but I'm just curious if you're in the space to share more about you and your work, and yeah, just a little bit more about that and your love of somatics, and yeah, any healing that you've seen come through for yourself or for others that's really profound with your methodology.
Yeah. So like I said, I was trained in something called psychedelic somatic interactional psychotherapy. It's a very unique type of medicine work. A lot of medicine work tends to be kind of like a sitter sort of model, like music, eye mask, very hands off. Some are a little bit more engaged. This one is very much focused on trauma, leaning into the body's wisdom to help process that trauma. And then paying attention, like being very relational and paying attention to the space between practitioner and journeyer to help kind of like weave in those missing experiences, those healing experiences that weren't available when the original trauma happened. It's a very unique type of work, like in that we're doing something called selective inhibition, where you're identifying all like your normal coping mechanisms that kind of pull you away from being in contact with the trauma, like the charge of the trauma. So that might be like getting super intellectual, going meta. There's like physical things that might happen in the body, like fidgeting, swallowing, licking your lips. So these sort of things were like turning down the volume on. And then what emerges is usually something called fight, flight, or some version of fight, flight, freeze. And then the body, like you're giving the body an opportunity to move through those trauma survival strategies. And then what comes out is usually, the opportunity to like come out on the other side. No, I'm aware I'm not describing this particularly well right now. But I have to say it's freaking amazing. Like my own trauma healing process has gone to a whole nother level in my capacity, like be in my heart, be like articulate what I need and want. Lately, like I'm feeling my yoni on a whole nother level. It's absolutely glorious. Like sex is so much better. So like, it's not just for like clearing out trauma. It's like becoming more alive. Yeah. Rick, it looked like you had your hand up. Did you have a question?
No, I wasn't sure if we'd have enough time. It looks like we're like 3 minutes out. No, I just wanted to say thank you for providing a down to earth platform to for this type of psychedelic guidance. It's something I'm like kind of like fascinated with and think about all the time. Like let's say every day, 50 new people make a website offering their like shamanic services and this healing and guidance. Like, of those 50, like a certain percentage of them is just going to be delusional people that like think they're shaman, and a certain other percentage is going to be just like devious, manipulative, people that are just trying to make a buck. Yeah, as psychedelics grow in popularity, there's going to be more people looking for answers, and I think we need more people like you out in the field. So, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Rick, for sharing your voice. All right. All right. So I think that's basically it. Yeah, I'm seeing Annie in the chat. Thank you, Annie, for being my wing woman. So appreciate you. She offered the Fireside Project link and the Chacruna Institute link. Thank you for sharing your experience, Rosetta. Yeah. All right. So if you're interested in working with me or learning more about my work, you can find me at LorinaManzanita.com. That's where you can connect with me there. All right, I'll hand the talking stick to you, Asteria, to help transition us to Annie, I believe. Oh, let me stop sharing so you can make somebody else a co-host.
Here we go. I was muted. Thank you so much, Lorena, thank you so much for your offering. And yes, thank you, Annie, for helping with those links in the comment. And Lorena, you're going to post you posted your website. Yeah, thank you so much. And so we are reaching our next hour now. And we have Annie. Annie is here. Annie is set up as a co-host. Okay, beautiful. Oh, okay. So briefly, before we begin the next hour, I am going to send in the chat the safe space agreements for the container. Again, I'm going to copy and paste those in. Here we go. Okay, welcome to our next hour of the Entheos Society's May Talk 24-hour live event about sacred sexuality, safety, and sexual misconduct in ceremonial, psychedelic, and healing spaces. We have safe space agreements for this container. Please honor safe space agreements. You can see them in the chat. A brief overview is that we are honoring the digital talking stick. So please raise your hand or give us an indication in the chat if you would like to speak. At the end, we can honor timed shares based off of the presenter's needs. Respect the presenter. All of our amazing presenters are showing up in selfless service, sharing with us their time, energy, presence, learned wisdom, medicine, magic, gifts, and more. Please honor their offerings with the utmost respect. This hour will be recorded. We have a zero tolerance policy for aggression, bullying, attacks, threats, provocateering. And we're going to do our best to honor nonviolent communication, which is speaking with I statements, asking permission prior to giving advice or reflection, allowing the experiences and truths of others to be valid in their own right, refraining from disaffirming the truths and experiences of others. Self-care, if you're in need of self-care, these topics are sensitive. Please do whatever it is you need to do to take care of you. which can look like asking for support privately or in the chat. And yeah, if you see or hear something or feel unsafe, please notify any of the hosts or co-hosts. So thank you so much, Annie, for being present, and I'll let you introduce yourself and pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Asaria. Yeah, and thank you, Lorena, for that last hour. Yay. Super grateful to be here. I also just moved outside. How is the sound, like background sound and stuff? Can you hear me okay? Okay. And if it changes, just let me know because I have my headphones. Yeah. So I'm in my backyard. I'm very grateful. East Diane Creek is right here. So it helps me to be outside and just sitting on the ground. Yeah, and I'm very grateful once again to be here around this subject of sexual integrity, sexual misconduct, sexual healing, and just sexuality in general, intersecting with substances and psychedelics. So yeah, I will give a little introduction before I dive in. My name's Annie, and I work as a somatic intimacy coach as well. And I work around sexual trauma renegotiation, pleasure orientation, help folks have relationships with their bodies that they feel good about. And I do sit for folks with psychedelics as well, and help people with preparation and integration for ceremonies or other types of altered state experiences. And yeah, I'm also curious about like where I'm at with my career and the work I do, about stepping into educational spaces like we're all sharing here, helping educate each other. I very much am interested in non-hierarchical spaces or like unnecessary hierarchies, which I appreciate these events that Entheo Society puts on as a non-hierarchical space, like opening it up to anybody. So we'll come back around to the power dynamics later in this conversation. Yeah. So I have a background in regenerative design, permaculture, ecology, and farming. So very much what a lot of my perspective and experience comes from my relationship with the earth and the land, which I find to be completely, for myself, like one and the same. So our relationship with our bodies and each other, the power dynamics, and as we are a manifestation of Mother Earth walking around in these meat suits as long as we've been allowed to. So I will also circle back around to that again. Anything else about myself? So I guess with that perspective, like we will take some time in this hour for like the micro or acute, like interpersonal, personal relationship with our bodies, our relationship with each other and substances. And then I'll also be bringing in the macro perspective, like cultural sociodynamics and our relationship with the earth. So I like to kind of go between the macro and micro perspectives when I'm given some free reign like I am here. So grateful. And as far as my work, I do work what I like considering this purple zone of like legality, because I'm not personally for legalization. I am for accessibility. However, I believe legalization allows it to be illegal. If it's legal, that means in certain areas it can be illegal. So to this day, you know, hundreds of thousands of people every year are still put into prisons in the United States for substance-related crimes. And the people who have been harmed by the war on drugs the most are not the people who have access to this psychedelic therapy happening right now. So I am not an advocate for legality as it has been in the past and how it's currently going, although there's certain areas with like the decrim has really helped just open it up. And so we really need to just be advocating for education so people can be safe. And that's what I hear everybody doing here. Yeah. And so I'm going to post, excuse me, there's flies all over my face out here. Some resources at the beginning and end of this hour in the chat, because I don't have slides. This is going to be open interactional conversation. Okay, maybe I should have labeled them and put them individually. The first link is a form to a survey that I would like people to take if you're comfortable taking a survey on the intersection of substances and sexuality. That's the first link. Second link is my website. Third link is signing up for my newsletter, which you'll need to do if you take the survey. If you want the results, please sign up for the survey or newsletter as well. Psychedelicsurvivors.com is a great resource for people who have been harmed in psychedelic spaces. So that's the fourth link. Sex Positive Families, an LCSW in Texas started that kind of like a clearinghouse educational platform online that I think is really great, because I personally think we live in a sex phobic culture in the United States, and Sex Positive Families is a great resource to have sex positive talks with someone of any age, supportive material around that. And then the last link is a link to, I think Chacruna published it, Psychedelic Justice. If anyone reads one book about the psychedelic movement happening right now, I recommend Psychedelic Justice. And that's the final link on there. Okay, that's kind of my intro. And I want to, like I said, I don't have slides, but I do have like certain topics and activities I want to cover if folks are interested. So before I carry on, does anyone have anything they want to share or say? Okay. And just because I'm not here to be presenting something in this way, yes. Please just chime in whenever you feel like it. Raise your hand, use the emoji response thing. This is like getting dusty out here. Okay. So, yeah, thank you, Rosetta. So sexual trauma renegotiation, I'm gonna talk about a few specific acute aspects of sexual trauma and how it shows up for individuals often, sometimes, from a nervous system perspective, from nervous system regulation perspective. So if somebody has sexual trauma, this could be true whether it happened when they were younger or as an adult, although I do think from my experience working with folks around this topic, if something happens when somebody is a child versus when they're an adult, those can be very different experiences, obviously. So like for me, for example, I do have the experience of sexual assault, emotional abuse, as well as rape as an adult. And I do not compare those experiences very much to folks who experienced anything in that realm as a child or before they were an adult. Although if anyone has any of those experiences, they can show up in similar ways, such as overcoupling. So overcoupling is a term that I learned from somatic experiencing, but basically when two things, for example, in this context, the experience of something potentially pleasurable or actually pleasurable, and something painful, such as a boundary rupture or ignoring or an assault, when those two things are happening at the same time, or in similar times, then those two experiences can be overcoupled in our nervous system, where anytime we might be moving towards something pleasurable again, such as a sexual experience or intimate otherwise, it is overcoupled with that rupture, that assault, that ignoring of the boundary, whatever that was. And this can be true if somebody was, assaulted by somebody else or had some boundary broken by another person. But this could also be true for somebody who has associated like their own boundaries, like they allow their own boundaries to be crossed for whatever reason, or think that they should have some sort of perfect relationship with their own boundaries. They allow their own boundaries to be crossed, and it can also be convoluted in that situation where people are internalizing that shame versus, oh, I understand that was that other person doing something wrong. So yeah, that overcoupling piece, and that can show up in a lot of different ways. But basically, for someone to be relaxed and to enjoy a pleasurable experience, such as sex, whether it's with themselves or another person, there's a very specific thing happening in our nervous system, which is excitement and relaxation at the same time. In order to move towards orgasm, our bodies need to be excited and relaxed in a specific way. And that's kind of a specific area for our nervous systems to be. And some people have trouble accessing that because of what I just shared, but also for other reasons. And just kind of like a footnote on that with sexual trauma. If somebody has a sexual dysfunction, let's say they can't reach orgasm or difficulty reaching orgasm, and they have a sexual trauma, it's really easy to assume those two things are directly linked, which is an assumption. It could be true that those two things are linked, but they could also have difficulty reaching orgasm because of something else completely. Our vagus nerve is like one of our biggest nerves. And like, if you have a car accident, for example, or some other large disruption, weird eating habits that like mess with your digestion, or your digestion could be off put, we can have trouble with our nervous systems for all sorts of different reasons. For example, living in late capitalism overall. And so just want to name that, like being careful to like make assumptions about people from what we know about them. Yeah. So yeah, pleasure and pain becoming enmeshed. So very much, in the previous hour, Lorena covered a lot of this, but like when in doubt, go slow. You're not in doubt, also like go slow. Just going slow generally helps things. So whether you're, working on your sexual renegotiation on your own, yes, or with a professional in some capacity, or it comes up with psychedelics or other plant allies. And if it's overwhelming or triggering to go slow, because the coping mechanism has been, going slow can be the activation itself. Like when I went slow, when I slowed down, the bad things happen in some space. So that's when, having some professional support working through those things could be very helpful, or at least someone you feel very safe around when you're working with those things. And once again, like just bringing in like the context, our entire culture is like constantly telling us to speed up, do more, be more productive. So that could amplify some of these things for people. If you or someone are getting ready for a psychedelic experience and you're not super familiar to kind of new this particular substance or set and setting, 3 basic questions I like to ask people is, what is your relationship with your body? What is your relationship with nature? And what is your relationship with chaos? In Westernized culture, and maybe others, but I'm from the US, so that's what I'm familiar with. Like, we have this very much emphasized focus on control. And so psychedelic experiences very much help us realize that we are not in control. And this can be one of the most disrupting things, especially if you have sexual trauma, where you had no control over your personal body in a way that was, obviously not okay. So these are some basic questions, like, because if you're sitting for someone, or you yourself are going into experience, some people have these traumas and they might not know about it, because our mind, if it happened when you were young, or if it happened at a time when this memory got suppressed because it's uncomfortable, and that's our way. One way our bodies take care of ourselves is by forgetting things that were extremely challenging. So yeah, that question, what is our relationship with our body, can be pretty foundational. So let's see, anything else around that? Another thing around, because Lorena named this before, where we can sometimes be recreating, if we have sexual trauma, it's very common, and also not necessarily the norm, but it is very much common. And one of the top ways that people will cope or try to renegotiate trauma is through this passive way where we're recreating it. Unfortunately, since there's ample opportunity to do so. And so the power dynamic between, like, the practitioner or the ceremonialist or whoever, that's a power dynamic that can easily recreate. Psychedelics are romanticized in general. And then you add on the fact that, at least in this culture, we put on a pedestal specific types of relationships, mono, romantic, idealism, also heteronormative, but we're coming from that context of our value system that will amplify that for all of us, I think, to some degree. So often if somebody has a trauma, we are recreating it, we're moving towards it, because maybe we can do it in a different way. Oh, I can have control over it this time, or it could be a subconscious thing, or we avoid it. I'm never putting myself into that situation again. I can't take those risks again. Or, I can't make myself vulnerable again, or like, I can't lean into that intimacy or whatever because that thing happened. So just naming those, are that just kind of a very broad, overarching way that people respond to a boundary broken, or it could be a trauma, which would be a trauma of commission, like somebody breaking your boundary, or a trauma of omission would be something that should have happened that didn't, like getting enough hugs from our parents or something. Which is why this talk is super important, because just like platonic hugs, for example, and like therapeutic touch and closeness, like it really needs to be okay for these things to be like on the menu for folks. And then also, most of us don't necessarily have a lot of practice in those, at least those people who maybe, I would just say in like the medical field, like, because touch is just this, like, unless you're a massage therapist or whatever, is often just like, don't go there, don't touch the touch. So that could be re-traumatizing from the trauma of omission thing, where can bring in practices around that. I'm going to say one more thing about kind of this general movement. because I'm, like I said, I operate in a gray or purple area of legality. I have operated in the underground. I've been doing psychedelics since I was in my early 20s. It's my personal church. And I've found equal healing benefit from raves, from ceremony, from therapeutic, equal benefit in my personal experience from all of those. I have a high tolerance for chaos myself. So any space can be therapeutic depending on somebody's personality. So one of my, it's not a critique, but like, it kind of is a critique, but just something I think it's important for people to be aware of. If the average person who is not connected to a psychedelic community looks online and they live in Middle America or somewhere for some psychedelic therapy, there's certain things that will pop up around what's available. And it's coming likely from the medical model. So the medical model is legitimate, very concerned for safety. All of that is great. I'm super glad I live in today's world where I don't have to worry about dying from a urinary tract infection or something. The medical model serves great purposes. What I think is unethical is that people don't see that there's other options and what those options mean, what those options actually are, and how you can figure out which options are the best for you, what set and setting are best for you. Maybe a ceremony based in somebody else's spirituality is what you need, and it's not. Maybe the therapeutic environment is not what's safe for you. Maybe it is what is safe for you. So just allowing people to have options. How do you relate to spirituality? I think that is as personal of a question as how you relate to sexuality. Even assuming people are sexual is a thing. Like, there are asexual people and gray asexual. So yeah, just naming that people have choice. So if you're sitting with someone and they're encouraging you to have the eye mask on, or encouraging you to lay down, for example, or like that's how it's going to be, and that's what's like the best, I would just say, I hope to empower people that they have options within a journey to be with that spirit essence of that psychedelic in a way that's the most healing. And that's between you and the psychedelic, and it's not between you and anybody else. And so if you have moments in a psychedelic journey where you need to go inward and have an eye mask on, and like, that's usually actually a part of the psychedelic experience. And there's also often parts, because it's like this journey, that's why we call it a journey, where being more outward and having more movement and getting in the body is going to be what is healing. And so I encourage people to question if you're with a practitioner or a therapist that's saying you need to like stay laying down, or you need to stay, I would say, in my opinion, that is coercive passivity. It's coercing people to be passive. So that's my kind of 2 cents on the medical model push thing. And the underground is most of the ground that we're sitting on. Okay, before I go on, I want to give us all options as a group on how to use the second half of this, because I have a few different ideas, and then check in with anybody as well around what I've already shared. So before I share what my idea is for the second half, does anybody feel like sharing what's come up for you, what I've shared so far, or anything? And I gotta get the glare off so I can see.
Well, I would like to try some raves now.
You would like to try what?
Some raves now, and now because you said that your raves, you said that they helped you, and I'm like, wow, maybe my kids were onto something. And I was saying, no.
Yeah. Well, thanks for saying that. I definitely suggest people not have their first experiences with a psychedelic in a high stimulus environment. That's my experience. Anytime you're doing something for the first time, I would have the most control over that, like in your home with a buddy. But if you've become familiarized with the substance a number of times, then you can explore into different, and like I've had so much healing in raves, like dancing. Yes. Yeah. And at 11 p.m., I think Steve Beale from the UK is a friend of mine who's like a seasoned raver, and he's going to be talking about conduct in the rave environment. So I think I'll dive into that in that hour later today. Brian, you have your hand up. Do you feel like sharing, Brian?
I'm sorry, my connection is going crazy. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, like you guys were all chopping out for a second, so I just want to make sure that, oh, I don't.
I have a question. I didn't get it. You said there was 3 questions you asked. What is your relationship with your body? And what is your relationship with chaos? And what was the second one?
What's your relationship with nature?
Nature. Thank you.
Yeah. So as I see everything through this like ecological lens pretty much a lot of the time, and very much a lot of my my journeys are just like grieving and connecting with the earth around what's happening. So I think there's a lot of assumptions sometimes too, like, oh, nature is like, I'm sitting on the earth because Mama Tia, this earth is my main attachment figure. She's my emotional attachment figure. So, and because of our lifestyles nowadays, some people are biophobic. Some people that, wild spaces, it could bring up things like, and if it's totally unfamiliar, it might not feel safe. So I think it's easy to assume like the earth, and that's great, but that might be something in the preparatory session to like go over and converse about if that's something that's actually true for that person. That might be a goal. And once again, there's some critique there with like the Western medical model, because we're supposed to not have an agenda. We're supposed to just be objective, which in and of itself is a subjectivity. It's a subjectivity of like nihilism for what's happening, I think. But we are living on the earth, and if people can feel safe just sitting on the earth, that might be a resource. Although it's good to ask that question, because we can get a lot of information from someone's response to that. And then, oh, now I know if someone is having like a stressful moment in a journey, should I take them out to go sit under a tree? Because that's what would help me. But like, I shouldn't assume that that's what somebody else needs. Do you want to try again, Brian?
I can give it a shot. Can you hear me? Awesome. I apologize that I'm not stationary and able to. So I loved a lot of what you had to say, and I just wanted to chime in on a few things. And I wish I had heard you completely, but so much of what you said. So the things that I wanted to add into it was in discussing the medical model, like when we are formulating the Western sort of practices that we will develop for psychedelic facilitated psychotherapy. I think that you bring up a great point when you're mentioning the sort of like just putting the eye shades or diversity.
Hey, Brian.
I'm sorry, I'm done. I apologize.
Hey, if you turn off your video, it might help your connection.
Oh, okay.
Try turning off your video and we can probably hear you better.
just turn it off. Can you guys?
I think he may have gotten disconnected. I'll wait.
He's right. He's at the bot. He's there, but yeah. Maybe try again, Brian, without your video.
Yeah, I turned the video off. I don't know if anyone can hear me. I'm sorry, guys.
That is that
All right. So I'm about to give up unless you guys can hear me now. I don't know.
Actually, now we can hear you way better. Right now we can, as of now. Yes, go.
I'm just like trying to figure out, like, is this just not the right time? Is this just a sign? Or okay. Let me know if I start chopping out and I'll just end. But so I wanted to say that you know, the research is in its infancy. Like, we have just started researching. Of course, it occurred in the 50s, but researching how we can develop models so that it does allow for diverse experiences so that people can get what they need, which is what an amazing point that you are outlining, that people need different things at different times in different situations. Yeah, I just wanted to add that in there because you know, I'm heavily interested in the development in the West, and you know, if we can. Oh, then okay. The last thing that I want to say is that in terms of that developing that therapeutic environment that you're mentioning to create the sense of safety that's necessary for one to be able to have the therapeutic experience. I just that brought to mind Carl Rogers and his conceptualization of the therapeutic space. And one of the things that he said was that you need to, as the clinician, as the guide or trip sitter, to embody 3 personality traits, which are empathy, genuineness, and unconditional positive regard. So I think we can pull a lot from Nigerian psychology, depth psychology, analytical psychology, and pull all these things together towards a medical model, which is obviously flawed, like you said. And anyway, I guess that was just some comments, and then I just want to say that I loved everything that you had to say, and thank you guys for letting me chime in.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Positive regard, empathy. I already forgot the other one.
Genuineness, empathy, and unconditional positive regard.
Yeah, okay. Genuineness, empathy, positive. Yeah, and I personally believe those are things like I was taught some good amount of empathy from my parents, but I don't particularly think that is like a characteristic that's like the strongest in the culture I live in, you know, all the time. So I do think it's something we have to be proactive about, to cultivate those things all the time, because going out into the world like requires some amount of boundaries. Like, we're not just walking. I want to be my most authentic self, but like I also have to conserve my energy. And so that the genuineness, I think of somewhat interchangeable with the feeling of or concept of like authenticity. And so, you know, hopefully like all of this is about us moving towards our authentic selves. And so we, as people who are sitting for someone else, I personally use the word sitter as opposed to like guide or whatever for myself. But if we're sitting for someone, you know, we are leading by example. And hopefully in a lot of our different, whatever the context of our relationships are, we lead by example. You know, if we want someone else to move towards their authenticity, the only way to support them doing that is by doing that ourselves. That's the only thing we have control over is ourselves. So yeah, an unconditional positive regard is awesome, because like, you know, with the topic of sexuality and sexual trauma renegotiation, you know, it's like, it's every aspect of this carries some amount of shame wherever you're at with it. There's like some shame, and we live in this culture where like, you know, even if nothing acute has happened to your person around a sexual boundary being crossed, we live in a culture that is unfortunately wrought with shame around sexuality. And so, you know, just really always coming back to our own inner compass of judgment or shame, and coming back to ourselves, you know, and so we're knowing what we're bringing to the relationship. And that helps us not assume what somebody needs. We don't know what somebody needs in a moment necessarily. And when we do that, we're empowering the other person to do that for themselves too. So, I think that that's a great foundation for just like healthy boundaries and supporting each other. Our wounds happen in relationship. Our healing is going to happen in relationship. So as much as these medicines are helpful, most of us, if we have a sexual trauma history, that could have happened under the influence. So it could be overcoupled with substances. However, some people might have a sexual trauma history that has nothing to do with substances. And so our healing comes from our interpersonal relationships. Psychedelics might be a tool that help. Psychedelics might be a tool that don't help some people. So, you know, really not making assumptions of what someone's going to need for their processing. Thank you so much for sharing, Brian. Does anyone else feel like sharing anything right now? What's come up in this conversation so far, or the first few hours, or anything? How you doing?
You said Mother Earth is our attachment figure. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And I think I say that because I'm trying to bridge like this like Western terminology and like psychotherapy around like attachment theory to larger context of the globe that we're all on. This is my personal opinion that I don't overtly in any way necessarily bring into my work, but that's what I love about this space. I'm like, once again, we're moving towards authenticity. So I'm just being me. I personally think where our main attachment figure, our primary attachment figure, you know, often is framed as like our parents or our lover or, you know, the people closest to us, for nervous system regulation, for, you know, our emotional needs. And I do think it gets somewhat convoluted once again because of a value system. I personally think we've been sold for approximately 7,000 to 10,000 years through patriarchy, sold a primary attachment value system around monoromanticism that causes much suffering and is not accurate to how we actually are. I do think that pair bonding is normal in general, but like we've evolved in community. And so we've evolved getting our emotional needs met by a variety of relationships, a variety of experiences. And, you know, there's this other term like global high, like this constant like chronic anxiety or depression that's happening in like a lot of cultures. And I think, and I believe, and I feel directly that has to do with what's happening with the earth right now, where we're like at a very pivotal point in deciding collectively how we're going to continue to live here. Are we going to continue to live here as if we're special and we do whatever we want without any repercussions? Or are we going to live here as if we want our children, our friends' children, our neighbors' children to inherit this beautiful paradise that we've been given. And we do not actually have that much time to get our collective shit together. And I do not think it's any different, or, you know, rape culture is happening in our human societies is no different than what's happening to, you know, Mother Earth, right? So we're operating in a system. This is systems thinking, deep ecology. We are, it's in the system. We're eating the food that comes from this earth that, you know, depending on where it's coming from, is like less and less minerals. And honestly, like this depression, you know, that's happening in our country, food and community are actually like good food, diet, and community connection are some of the main, you know, missing ingredients for why people are having mental health issues. It's not like they're not doing enough psychedelics. So psychedelics, it's very easy for spiritual bypassing to happen. It's very easy for individualistic thinking to continue, especially with the medical model. So
What's spiritual bypassing?
like, I don't know what my definition would be. If someone's having a challenge or there's something happening where there might be somewhat of a dismissiveness or saying that the answer is something spiritual. So if someone's really suffering or there's like something challenging that's happening, whether it's in the past and it's like an emotional response or it's actually like an in the moment issue where the solution is something that's like ephemeral or spiritual. So the psychedelic and world is full of spiritual bypassing, I think, where it's like, this is the answer. And it's like, for example, racism and white supremacy culture. Oh, we're all one. Well, maybe we're not all one. Maybe there's systemic racism, patriarchy, and ignoring of the ecological collapse. Maybe we're not all one because this is happening and people are suffering while other people, it's mostly money. It's classism is the umbrella oppression that all this other stuff falls under. We're not all one. We're not acting like that. It's nice to say. It might feel good to say that. That's like, it could be very rude just saying that to someone who's like actually suffering, and there are actual solutions in the material world that have to do with those things. It's not all like feathers and rainbows and unicorns. Just do more psychedelics, we're all one. No. We have to act in between the psychedelic sessions in accordance to these messages of love, 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 love. So
Thank you very much.
I do believe love is within everything and that we can use the power of love, but we are living in this material space where there's material solutions to the things, you know? And that's why I'll say, you know, like psychedelics can really help someone with sexual trauma healing. And it could also be extremely disturbing. If someone's experience was complete loss of control over their body, to say, just take this thing, you're going to completely lose control. Like that could be very traumatizing for someone. So we have to be really careful about what we might proselytize to people based off of our own personal experiences.
And if no one else has any questions, how about this one? You said our wounds happen in relationships and our healing happens in relationships. So if you have a lot of trauma, you have to be in a relationship or have relationships with humans in order to heal. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So I said that in regards to a couple of things specifically. One, the one-on-one and projected objectivity within Western therapeutics. So like, let's say I was operating under the stereotypical structure of a licensed therapist. I'm not a licensed therapist, but let's just say So like, I don't really bring in my vulnerability. I don't bring in my personality too much. I don't bring in too much of my own, like, you know, I'm here as this rock for this person to project onto. That's kind of like the traditional, which can be super useful in certain contexts. And that should be like a tool, like a thing on the menu. But it doesn't really allow for the person to be with that authentic person. Like the client is not interacting with the authentic practitioner. They're operating with a, you know, a boundaried person, which is not real life at all. Like that doesn't help people prepare to go out in the real world, although it can, it can, but often it doesn't, because our wounds happen in personal relationships and we're going to heal them in the context of an authentic personal relationship. It doesn't mean we can't have professional boundaries if we're having a professional relationship. Like we're not going to have sex, we're not going to kiss, and we're going to keep on our clothes, and we're going, but let's say we acknowledge feelings. How can we acknowledge feelings? What if your client tells you they love you? Are we going to tell them that's inappropriate because it's not professional? That could be very shame inducing. Like that could be one of the most vulnerable things somebody might say. And that, you know, how can we hold each other in love? You know? And that's like feminism too, you know? Like we can wear different hats in relationship because that's how normal relationships work. Oh, I'm their housemate. Oh, I'm also their friend. Oh, I'm also their daughter or whatever. So yeah, and I also meant that in the context of psychedelics where, because I've known a lot of people who have done a lot of psychedelics and like hundreds and hundreds of ceremonies. It does not inherently translate to interpersonal skill building. It does not necessarily translate to even healing certain things that are happening in the context of our environment or our social structures. It can be, psychedelics can often be used as an escape. I'm, you know, like I said, I do well in chaos, so I do really well in the psychedelic space, but I've had to be really careful and learn how to integrate because I'm like, oh, I'm just going to go do this thing. Like, I'm just going to go blast off and, you know, destroy my ego. Like, it's no big deal. But like, what good is that doing if I'm not grounding it and doing the work in between sessions? So I think, yeah, relational therapeutics is something that's been missing in the Western world that is going to be very key in how like therapeutics. So that's why like people are talking about transpersonal psychology a lot in like these psychedelic trainings. But I if people love the academic track, it's not me. I like to suggest people look into liberation psychology. And that's like where a lot of indigenous teachers are being brought in and more of this larger context. Like we're not happening in a vacuum, you know, we're happening in a context. So liberation psychology really takes all of that into account and is kind of the next evolution from like transpersonal psychology. Does anyone else have anything to share? I kind of had some other ideas, but I love that this is a collective situation. I will say one more thing that, because we might not have time to do this exercise together, although we could if people want. And then I don't know if there's any questions in the chat I missed. I haven't really been looking. So I'm not up to pen. I think that was when you already spoke to that, Brian. So if you are sitting for somebody else as a practitioner, or, you know, this is a great exercise, I think, just for ourselves as well. Consent and then boundaries. You know, you could ask someone like, oh, do you consent to me holding your hand? Well, if we don't know what our own relationship is to embodied boundaries, or that person's relationship is to their body, once again, that question, what's your relationship to your body? You know, if I'm a practitioner and someone's like, yes, I would love for you to hold my hand. Like, are they saying that because they're fawning? Are they saying that because they want to be a good client? Are they saying that because they think they should? Like, how do I know what they're consenting to? So informed consent takes, you know, a lot of transparency and forward communication, especially before any altered state is happening. In general, hopefully there aren't any new experiences happening in a psychedelic state. So especially in any sort of professional realm. Like if you're with your friends, but I mean, once again, going slow. So informed consent takes, you know, a lot of transparency and forward communication, especially for you, Alan. That was kind of echoing back. So an exercise, and I don't know if we want to do this for a few minutes or not, but I'll at least share it so people get an idea. Rosetta, you're like, yes, you want to do it? So I'll share what it is, embodied boundaries, basically a way to get some clear information. And it's always good to practice on ourselves if we want to share this with other people, but it's hard to share things that we're not familiar with ourselves. Thinking of a topic, a cause, a relationship, something that you feel really, really, really clear about. Super clear about, no doubt, you know how you feel about it, that thing, that person, that cause. Once you got that thing, we're going to go through yes and a no with that. Very simple. Whatever that thing is, holding that in your mind's eye, in your heart, imagining that, if it's safe to close your eyes, thinking of that being or that cause, that thing you feel very, very clear about. And then thinking about why you chose that thing. What is the yes? You're for this. Maybe it's sexual integrity, maybe it's psychedelics, maybe from, you know, for me, it's the earth situation. Whatever that person, that relationship, that thing is, thinking about that yes. And we're all just gonna take a moment with that. What does that yes feel like for you? If it feels safe to do a little body scan, just noticing sensations, imagery, what does that yes feel like? What does your yes around this thing feel like? And shaking that off. Same thing, thinking of this cause, this relationship, whatever it is, and thinking of if it feels safe enough, that thinking of this thing feeling threatened. Protecting this thing. Thinking of some sort of the no around this. Your inner mama bear. Thinking about that no around this cause, protecting it, and just noticing what that feels like. How does that no show up for you? Now, shaking that off again. And the phrase, if you feel comfortable saying this out loud, the phrase, maybe I need more time. And just saying that out loud, maybe I need more time. And just noticing what it feels like to say that out loud. So I know we only have a few more minutes left, but I'm glad we got a little experiential practice in. It's just very foundational embodied boundaries exercise. And And then as far as and I'm curious if anyone wants to share what that was like. But I don't want to forget to say one more little thing about consent. A great way to start off a consent conversation with someone, and this could be in the professional realm or it could be in the personal realm, but like just simply asking someone, how do you relate to consent? That's a great way to get some information on how someone relates to consent. Is just to have a conversation about it, prompted by the question, how do you relate to consent? And then you might also share how you relate to consent and have an open conversation about that together.
Okay, there we are. We're good. So I just set it
Thank you.
on one presenter can share at a time. And then
Thank
as
you.
the host, I'm pretty sure you can share that. Okay. All right. Woo. All right. I'm going to go have a heart attack now.
It's okay, man. Relax. Take some deep breaths. It's all good. There's no more porn, hopefully. So I'm Alan. Hello, everyone. You hear me all right? Yeah. Okay, here's the chat. So I'm a psychedelic psychotherapist, right? I went to CIS in San Francisco and is part of a big community of psychedelic psychotherapists that have been doing this work for 30 plus years. And, you know, when in communities are that tight and have worked together for that long, sometimes, you know, sexuality does get explored, but it's very much like towards, you know, once you've done a lot of other foundational work, namely like sexuality shouldn't, or sexual conduct, I guess, like shouldn't be part of healing spaces. However, it's challenging that there are really no healing spaces designed specifically for sexuality. I mean, there are, but they're hard to find, right? And I find that so many clients come to me that have been in therapy for many years and never talked about sexual trauma with their therapist, right? For whatever reason, they didn't feel safe, or like this person would judge them, or yeah. But that's kind of common too with a lot of people that have been in extended therapy. Like working with psychedelics, obviously, it's one of the most powerful tools we have, as well as sexuality. These are two of the most powerful tools we have for exploring ourselves and consciousness and the body and the life. And so bringing those together can obviously be very explosive also. Yes, it's accelerated work, but there definitely should be some foundational work done prior, right? Because what you're opening up is like a history of trauma, not just yours, but this could be everyone in your lineage, right? And even if there isn't so much trauma, like just the paradigm around sexuality, right? The sexuality, there's so much shame in our culture. So it's a repressed culture that's also sexually hyperactive, like hypersexual culture with all this shame also. And so like you really can open Pandora's box when you're doing, you know, working with sexuality and psychedelics. And, you know, with psychotherapy, there's the transference that is involved, where you become this person's parent energetically. And that's great at first until the transference goes into shadow. And if that parent was abusive, sexually abusive, or didn't protect someone from abuse, then that shadow will get projected onto you. And that will happen with a lover, partner, or obviously many of us know, right? If you've been in a relationship, like that person at some point, it becomes your parent to some degree. It can also become your abuser. And so this is the benefits of having a therapist you're working with on a regular basis, that this person is carrying the transference that then doesn't need to be projected onto your partner, because that will make sex and psychedelics that much more complicated and less healing and just more complicated. You know, we're opening up, yeah, the whole history of not just your childhood and all the, you know, imprints of sexuality that are usually aren't very healthy. But yeah, all the repressed sexual or deviant sexual activities that have gone on in the last several generations, right? I work with a lot of people, more women, I guess a lot, that will do psychedelics and have a sense that they were violated. They don't have a memory, but they have a sense that something happened. And this can be super tricky because they could make it their dad, they could make it their brother, try to unpack all these memories, and there's not really a memory there. But when you do the family constellation work or lineage work or working with, psychics or whatever you're doing to look beyond that life, it could easily be mom, grandma, an aunt, someone else that was violated and it never was spoken about, because it's so common that not only is it not spoken about, you're shamed for trying to speak about it. I've worked with a lot of women that unfortunately are bound in situations where when it's family members, in these cultures, I live in Latin America, so it's a very much more of a tight family system where like the abusers are at the dinner table or at the Christmas or here or there, and it's not supposed to be talked about. So, this is a very challenging dynamic and hard to work with. The psychedelics, so much work on sexuality can be done without being sexual, right? Most of sexuality is actually, our imaginations. We think about sex more than we actually have sex. Right. So working even with fantasy and imagination, you can get so much done before you even go on to the touch, if you even need to go to that kind of work. These are for people that are looking, to explore that type of, hands-on healing work, which there is a lot of techniques, but it's also inappropriate to try to just introduce those techniques to your client, right? This needs to be someone who's looking for asking for sexual healing. Like, namely, sexuality is not in sacred spaces. In North American sweat lodges, women are usually covered up. Like, it's very not, and that's not a repressive thing. It's just about being very, humble, right, with this amazing thing that is sexuality. And that culture is just a very, less sexually expressive than many others. And so, yeah, I don't know. What would you like me to talk more about?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know that you're helping support people heal as a facilitator. And yeah, I'm just wondering if you've ever had any situations coming up where people are more in their sexual energy, and if they're ever directing it towards you, or what you do in a dynamic of that. What is your response? What is your protocol if it's happened?
Oh, absolutely. No, it happens. Whoa. I'll turn off the chat. I think we got bombarded in the chat. How do I get that off my screen? Anyhow, yes, that has happened. What has happened more, like when I first came into working with Ibogaine at an Ibogaine center where they were also using Bufo. After Ibogaine, people are so open that when they do a Bufo experience, that's usually when they get that like orgasm with God. And so, I mean, a woman could be in a full orgasmic, whoa, state for 10, 20 minutes. When they come back, they're not sexually activated necessarily, right? And so it's not so much of a projection thing as it is if you're doing MDMA, particularly with MDMA, right? Where that could be a 2-hour orgasm that a person is, for women. I guess I've never had that experience with a client, but I have with women. And so, I'll turn off the light, blow out the candle, and just, sit back, not make it a voyeuristic thing. If people start to touch themselves, though, then it's kind of like, hey, maybe this is not the, we'll gently intervene and say, maybe this is not the time or space. But usually it's not touch. It's just an activated kind of Kundalini experience where people are like in this orgasmic state, right? Yes, I've been asked to like hold hands or hold and more, but the limit is holding hands and holding, like a hug, but not a sexual thing, not engaging the lower chakras. This is like the upper chakras, right? And these are clients that I've done a lot of work with, well, some more than others, obviously, but I've usually constellated people before, doing medicine. And what I focus on in the constellation is the attachment wound, right? Because that is what, to start working with sexuality, you really need to first have your attachment wound under control and have more of a secure attachment style. If not, it's going to be a shit show. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for reflecting that.
Yeah. I've had some clients come because they can't orgasm or they can't orgasm with a partner. And so now that's a whole different type of client, right? Now that's someone looking to explore sexuality, right? They're not necessarily looking for psychedelics. However, so much of orgasm is based on being relaxed and clearing the trauma out of the system. And so much of that can be done without, any kind of sexual contact, obviously, right? But working with, the inner child to feel safe, secure, whatever trauma has to be overcome, and also just all the beliefs around sexuality, right? There's so much shame is in the belief system. Like we all could say to some degree we have, a type of institutionalized trauma that comes from religion, most likely, that's just kind of put its, imprint on everything. And so, these stories of shame will play out in the dynamic. And that's what you're supposed to play out in a psychodynamic relationship, right? And a therapist, but this is a controlled way over time. And so it doesn't do it with your romantic partner. If you want to start doing psychedelic sex acts and doing tantra, I have, some mantra badra here behind me with his consort, but usually you don't do consort work until you're like practically enlightened. It's not the beginners. It's not for beginners. And it's very dangerous, obviously. I mean, I grew up a psychonaut in high school, and from a very young age, you can learn that using psychedelics and sex, you can make someone totally infatuated with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where the manipulation can come involved, and the power. Sex is, it's about power. If there's not a big wounding and it's about there's a power dynamic. I've worked with a lot of women that, would call themselves their escorts, and they have other careers. They can't stop doing that. Mostly it's about the power, and so, yeah, needing to, that power dynamic is going to explode everywhere if you start working with sexuality in a way that's not, I wouldn't say that's not contained, but without working on some of these other wounds before, right?
Yahira Lobos has a question for you, Alan.
Okay.
Thank you so much for sharing. I work with a lot of youth and New Earth visionaries that are just stepping into this work of ascension. They're also on the hero's journey. And I've been hearing, because I listen, a lot of the younger generations, like in their 20s and 30s particularly, they're very interested. They're saying at all these events that they're going to conduct these kind of ceremonies. And so my higher self is asking on behalf of the younger generations, what message can we share actually with all people about because there's some things that you're sharing with me today, and I've started doing psychedelics when I was 14 and I'm now 51. I've never heard before, like that people can be manipulated in relationships through the plant medicine. And now I'm a conduit and an oracle, and I travel around the US. So I'm really involved with the communities. And I have this really big concern as I'm listening to you about, oh gosh, what could we create for the youth? Okay, so I'm going to plant a seed, and I'm going to ask you, Alan, as well, the question: how could we get this information out to the high schools and the colleges, to the mainstream, beyond them finding us? Because here's the thing, they're not looking to be sacred. They don't know about that yet. And I've known by the grandmothers telling me, because I suffer from being neurodivergent, I'm a survivor of all abuses. So I personally never took ayahuasca, right? Because I've been afraid that somebody would hijack me or manipulate me or hurt me. And now that I'm listening to you, I'm so grateful for listening to my higher self and knowing not to enter certain platforms. But the youth think that they can actually facilitate these ceremonies. And now what you're talking about is much more ascended. And so it's like, I don't even have that information about how to come into really sitting with the medicines in a sacred way and knowing that there's some way to actually ascend, like there's levels, like school. And I don't know where to get this information. And if you have any resources to share with us, thank you so much. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, youth are going to be youth. You can't really stop them from making their own mistakes, but you can teach people that they are in charge of their boundaries, that no other people is in charge of your boundaries. You are in charge of your boundaries, right? And that's not, these things are being taught more in younger generations than ours, obviously, where people are more aware and there is some more sex positivity and, what is a boundary, and, being able to even know what that is, and, and without the just say no campaign to sex that is anyhow. Yeah. We can just create models and programs that are out there that are more, safer and contained, and have a direction, and have some elders that are involved, and it's not just youth running wild. But the spiritual bypassing right now, it's like YouTube bypassing is the new thing. People watch something on YouTube and they think they can do it, and it's kind of this narcissistic culture too, and it's just it's a disposable culture, and so it's disposable information and knowledge, and you can just kind of ingest it, and that's how people are definitely addicted to plant medicines these days. I see it a lot, as Westerners, we just want to consume experiences and consume more experiences, more orgasms, bigger orgasms. Like so many people are following, in the sacred sexuality, the neo-tantras, it's about bigger and better. And that's not necessarily, for the benefit of all sentient beings. But the spiritual bypassing, people can't ascend if they still have mommy and daddy issues, right? If you're still angry at people in your family, you're not so far ahead on the spiritual path here, right? I developed a series of workshops because in California, I had friends doing all these goddess workshops and the divine feminine. And when I constellate them, man, they have the biggest tensions with their mothers, and it's so it's kind of, until you can integrate mom and that lineage and kind of not have that resentment there, it's more of a contrived feminine energy as something authentic, and so people need to do quite a bit of work before I feel they're ready to go through sexuality and explore sexuality in a healthy and contained way that isn't gonna explode on both sides of the fence. Because if people have been violated, and most people, we've all had our boundaries crossed to some extent, that is going to play out, right? I mean, you know, the healing dynamic is rupture and repair and repetition, you know, or repetition compulsion. So instead of before, like these things play out, but they need to be played out in a contained way. And some things, if the trauma was too big and work hasn't been done on it prior, then I mean, you can't contain it. It's just going to explode and burn everyone up. And, you know, everyone gets accused of this and what happened and that happened. Because in these spaces with healing spaces and psychedelics, I believe more than actual predatory people trying to take advantage, we're unleashing these subconscious dynamics that are about manipulation, seduction. I mean, everyone wants to be seduced. Everyone wants to be a seducer at some point, right? And so these dynamics or whatever happened in our lineage, it's playing out, you know? The community that I'm a part of, or was, because I don't live in California anymore, it's a pretty big community. And, you know, the leader, one of the men, you know, it came out that he was doing in journeys, working sexuality, right? And it was some men, they thought it was amazing. It helped them come out of the closet. 2 men that were in a marriage that, you know, but with other guys, on hindsight, they are feeling like, wait a second, that was not talked about before the session. Why is all of a sudden in the session we're exploring sexuality? And these, you know, some of these guys stayed with this man as their guide for years. And it wasn't until later that, you know, someone accused him of something that these friends of mine are like, whoa, wait, am I a victim? Was I violated? What? And it's interesting. It's only on a certain group of guys. Like that never happened with another group of guys. And I think they're all of the same religious affiliation. And so I think, you know, there's these subconscious dynamics that are so inside of us that come from religion, because it's controlling sexuality. That's how you control humanity. So controlling sexuality. It's simple, you know, and that's why we're all like, you know, you know, human dynamics are getting so much more challenging for people. Younger people are not being in couples. Couples aren't having sex. I mean, there's a little bit of a crisis with a relational crisis going on. And, you know, so much of it is from all the spin, you know, and the hypersexuality and the repressed sexuality and the shame. And, you know, so it's a lot to sort out.
I just had a quick question real quick. When it comes to tantric sex, like, is that something that's like more, like, do you see that more within like couples that are like really close and know each other well, or can that like happen with like a random person on a one night fling thing, or just?
No, that's usually couples. You know, couples that have done a lot of their own individual healing work, and you know, you kind of go in and out with what you work on together. And you know, Tantra isn't always about sex, right? But it's about sensuality and being, you know, embodied, and just, you know, using the senses as tools to liberate, to, you know, ascend, and not to, like, you know, transcend above these senses, but to use the senses as tools.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, but there are like workshops where people go, and you know, girls, you learn to squirt, and people are like swapping partners, and if you don't do that, you're kind of shamed. Like, I've worked with people that came out of these workshops a little traumatized, like, what, you know, it's this ecstatic state where everyone's like, yes, and everything feels great, and then afterwards people are like, why did I let those people do that to me, right?
Yeah, I'm in my like first healthy relationship right now after like a lifetime of like dysfunctional, codependent, like, you know, some pretty, yeah, dysfunctional. But yeah, this is like this is like the first, like, I'd read about the, you know, blending of you know, sex and, you know, spirituality and like stuff like the Kama Sutra, you know, just like kind of on the periphery, not like studied it or anything, but I'd heard of it. And like it didn't really make any sense until like it happened. And then I was like, oh, okay, yeah. And like, yeah, just like the drawings like behind you, like now when I see that type of like symbolism and stuff, like I totally know. And it's because it like happened with psychedelics, you know, and yeah.
Right. You know, we all have an intimacy wound. Even if we don't have a sexual trauma, like we have a wound, which the intimacy isn't always sex also, right? But at some point in our relationship, we will bump up against that wound. And psychedelics could sometimes just kick you right through that. And that it could be a little abrasive. You know, it could be too much, too quick. But you know, that's the, you know, I heard people talk earlier about going slow, right? You know, that definitely, that's the way to do it, because when you feel that emotional connection, which is part of the blockage is from the physical connection, you know, yeah, it's your emotional body and your physical body, right? They have to be in sync.
Where it's like just like that deep like eye contact, you know what I mean? Like that's where it's at. Yeah, it's not exactly what's going on with your genitals. It's like looking into each other's souls, or you know.
Exactly. But when you're in that state on psychedelics and you all are so open, you know, if it's not someone you're really kind of committed to, you could create some connections there that are going to be almost impossible to disconnect. Like you're opening up so much karma and so many lifetimes, and it's just like it feels awesome. Oh wow, this is so deep. And then you have to live life like that, and it's like, whoa, hey, well, this was too much, you know. Yeah.
We have a few, Yahira, you have your hand up. I wasn't sure if that was from before. And then we also have Chris has his hand up. Yahira, did you want to share? I'll ask you to unmute. I'm clicking the, no, okay. Okay, so Chris has his hand up.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation to join this. I forgot all about it, and I was just scrolling through my social, and it came up. And you know, my story is I got raped by a priest when I was 11 years old, and it was you know, it lasted a really long time. And so my introduction to spirituality and to sexuality was very skewed from age 11. And, you know, it took me until I was 34 years old to tell anyone about that. And when I was 36, I confronted him and I got him defrocked from the priesthood. And I took my power back at that time. But I didn't realize, you know, for the next, you know, from 1990, when I stopped, I was, you know, I was drinking myself to death, and I needed to stop. And you know, when I finally exposed that guy, you know, it was 6 years after he performed my sister's wedding ceremony. That's how close he got to my family. And so I never did have a healthy sex life ever. And even when I got married to my wife, you know, it just wasn't ever. The first 5 years were a lot of fun, and then we had a child, and then it disappeared. And 3 years ago, I started seeking PTSD treatment for the trauma. I didn't realize what had been developing as I got older in my life, what was happening to me and the disconnection I've had. And I've had tantra sessions with other women, and it's all about connection. It's about connection and communication and sensitivity and relationship. And my whole perception of my life changed it shifted dramatically. You know, I lost 60 pounds of weight, and now I get to start my life all over. I'm single, and I'm involved in lots of stuff that younger people are involved with. You know, I've got this mindset of the 60s still in my head of being a hippie, you know, and I'm retired, and I work for Uber part-time, and I settled with the Episcopalian Church last year, because I got involved in the state legislature, because there's really a law that allows people to get away with that kind of crime. There's a statute of limitations on that stuff. And I got involved with the legislature in 2013 and testified in Sacramento 6 times and got a law passed that the governor of California vetoed. And the work went on, and in 2020, I sued the Episcopalian Church. And last year they settled with me out of court because there's more to what that guy did than just to me. So this isn't new to me, but it is new to me, and I'm anxious and I'm excited, and I'm, in the Bay, living in the Bay Area now, where there's so much more stuff happening than in Southern California that I am resonating with. And I never did psychedelics when I was younger. My parents scared me away from that. But I've had some experience in the last few months, in the last year, with some psychedelics, some mushrooms and some LSD, and I've had some great experiences. And I know that the PTSD work that the doctors have been working on for the last 30 years, it's coming out every day. Something new is coming out about how the psychedelics are helping expand someone like me that got trapped,
And how many tantric sessions did you do with the healing women?
I've done a dozen of them over the last 3 years.
Great. That's
really
awesome.
really moved some energy. A lot of Reiki work, a lot of energy work. Getting connected. I came to San Francisco when I was 12 years old, and my parents should have left me here. Because it's a different vibe, whole different vibe. And so all the chakras got blocked at that age. All the good stuff that I grew up with in the 60s and the 70s around my friends that were trying to get me to slow down and to breathe. Chris, nobody knew what was wrong with me. Nobody knew what happened to me. Nobody knew that I was running. Nobody knew that I was running for my freaking life. I've been running for my life all my life. And instead of thriving, surviving. And now I'm thriving. And I'm so happy to have connected with this group. And thank you for letting me introduce myself.
You're welcome. Thank you. Yeah. And, like I was saying earlier, there's just not a lot of spaces to go do sexual healing work, right? So many people don't even talk about it, the sexual trauma, with their therapist. But now there's a lot of trauma work that's being done, all the somatic therapies, where you don't even have to deal directly with the sexual trauma that happened, but you're still releasing things from the body. The
body keeps score. The body keeps score.
Exactly. But obviously working with, women trained on doing hands-on tantric work to release things, because, certain muscle groups hold on to certain emotions, and most of the shame is in the perineum, right? And like masseuses don't work the perineum, right? Cranial sacral can get a little around there, but there's certain types of work that goes directly there. Sacred body rights is one of the types of practices, or sexological body work. There's different things of, releasing the lower pelvic floor for men, for women, to where all that shame is stored, right? But if you're doing that with a sexual partner on psychedelics, or, you're not intending to do that, but all of a sudden that happens, then all of a sudden you could be in a situation that's not so great. I've been in that situation before, where all of a sudden my partner is, reliving a sexual trauma that happened to her as a child.
God.
So, that's now it's date night, so like I'm working. So,
I'm also a prostate cancer survivor, and I know that was a direct result of what that priest did to me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
13 years.
Well, congratulations, man, on your healing journey.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else have a question or comment?
Yeah, man. Thank you for sharing, though, Chris. That's not it's not easy to talk about. I mean, especially for being a dude in America, you're kind of like supposed to adhere to these kind of tough guy ideals or something. But that, so it's not always easy to open up about that kind of stuff. So thanks, man.
Thank you. I'm not afraid to talk about it. Not anymore. I'm writing a book. I want to be able to help someone.
Right.
There's not very many 67-year-old men sitting around talking about this.
No. Yeah, and like I know I went through something similar. There was a documentary, the Leaving Neverland. It was about two of the kids that were molested by Michael Jackson, and like the way they described like that unaddressed unaddressed childhood trauma like started ripping their life apart in their late 30s via addiction and insomnia and insanity and stuff. And it was just like that was like my story was very similar to that. Like that stuff finds a way to like come up to the surface and wreak havoc in your life. So yeah, good. Stay on the right path, brother.
Thank you.
Yeah. And there's like I was saying earlier about kind of institutionalized trauma, people that just don't have a memory of something actually happening to them, but they feel as if they did, and maybe something did, sometimes something didn't happen. Sometimes what happened was all amongst children their age. However, it still registers as a trauma because it was adult content being introduced to kids at a young age. And so some people carry it as a trauma, some maybe not as much, but all of these things will just definitely come out when we're doing psychedelics and sexuality together. at some point, right? And so I the way I work now, like for people that were interested in working with this type of content, is it's a series of workshops. We'll work together online weekly and do 3 or 4 retreats over a year, and each retreat will deepen a little more into the process of working with the body and working with sexuality, because there's so much that needs to first be done for me to feel safe to open up those things in people, but also for the people to have a safe and contained healing process. Because sexuality is the most explosive, and there's a lot of people crossing boundaries and using their influence to just get their sexual needs met.
It's called manipulation.
Yeah. So I guess I got a few minutes left. If there's any other talking points anyone would like me to address.
There's a great book. I don't know if you know about it. It's called The Body Keeps Score by Van der Kolk.
Oh yeah, definitely.
That's what got me going, because I was having so much body pain, and I'm having a relational issue right now with a friend, and I've got a lot of body pain going on. And just sitting here in the last 15 minutes, I can feel it releasing. And I'm feeling like going outside now and like maybe I can walk a little bit. So really, I am really grateful that there's no coincidences.
No. Yeah, man. Walk barefoot. Find some grass.
Yeah.
I see Brian is raising his hand. Brian, did you want to share? I'm asking you to unmute.
Try again.
You're unmuted.
That mute button's hard to hit sometimes.
Still mute. I'm asking you to unmute. I'm clicking the button.
No.
He's having some connect. There you go.
Yeah, it's Brian. Can he not hear us?
He unmuted and then muted again.
Oops. Oh.
Got to hit that unmute on the screen.
I have a question. So this is while you're figuring out how to unmute Brian. So this is I'm actually going to go a little bit over this topic in my hour, but I'm just curious, Alan, of what your perspective is. And it's around how, like, for instance, I'm a combo practitioner, facilitator. I've done it for 11 years. And I never hear about anybody being sexually violated in combo. There's never a story that I've ever heard that somebody was sexually assaulted in combo. Combo is not a sensual sexual medicine. It's uncomfortable. We're detoxing, we're purging, we're clearing. And so with these other medicines, there is, for me and my observation of others, there is sensual, sexual energy that does arise with MDMA, mushrooms, bufo, ayahuasca. So one of the questions that I'm bringing to the table is that, relating to my personal journey, the beginning of my journey work was a lot of shadow work. Now my work is if there's a lot of sensuality that comes through, and it's almost uncontainable to the point where it's not appropriate for me to fully go into the space with the medicine that I would go into in the containers of group dynamics where other people are doing shadow work. And usually I'm in a co-facilitator position anyway, so I'm not even able to go there. But when I am able to go there, I'm like, whoa, what's happening? Like, I have to really actively maintain not going there because of it not being allowed or safe for others. So yeah, I'm just wondering your reflection on what could be the future, because perhaps people heal, and now so many people have done our shadow work, and we're able to step into the space of sensuality with sovereignty in a way that's safe.
Right. And so, like I said, the community that I was a part of for years, once people have done their shadow work, right? And so then there's retreats that are more focused on a tantric angle aspect, and not necessarily, people doing sexual acts, but that the sexual energy is present and it can be released, right? Not in a place of holding space, but our groups are small, 6, 7 people, and they're people that have been doing their own work for a long time. And so you build a container, and that's why I want to offer, people coming maybe 3, 4 times a year to do these retreats with the same group that are all working on the same topics together. And yeah, you go deeper. Obviously it's not safe to open up in certain ways when people are doing certain kinds of shadow work, and obviously it's something that needs to happen and wants to happen, right? But that's not the time and space for that, right? And so there are having communities of people that are doing their work and you feel safe to pursue that avenue with, but also knowing Kundalini awakenings are dangerous, and that one of my main maestras, she had an awakening and started having grand mal seizures. She did the ayahuasca for the first time and started having grand mal seizures, couldn't teach, couldn't work, didn't know what she was going to do for 9 months, a year. And someone said, go to the Amazon and do more ayahuasca. And she's thought that was crazy. But they told her, no, they left a snake in you. Whoever gave you that first session, they forgot to take this snake out. Okay, so she goes to the jungle, and now she facilitates ceremonies herself. But that's an example of a dangerous, and you hear it a lot you don't hear it so much, but in tantric communities too. I mean, especially Kundalini, yoga, where people are kind of pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And if you don't have your life together and a little grounded, you're not ready to kind of open those doors, right? Your life needs to be a little contained and grounded, right? You have a job, you pay your rent, you don't live in your car to do this kind of work that's going to really open you up, because also it is letting out a lot, right? And there needs to be the container and people that know what to do when these certain archetypes are coming to the surface, and people do start embodying Kali, or it's always Kali, right? Like, why not Lakshmi? But these energies start coming out, and so yeah, it needs to be with people that kind of know how to contain that. Yeah, I've never heard of people being violated in combo. In Bufo, I have, but yeah. Does that
Oh,
answer your
man.
question or get to what you were asking?
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I didn't
Yeah.
even really prompt you with a question. It was more like I was curious on your perception around that. And yeah, I think just like I think there's just this aspect of avoidance that these medicines do have this type of sensual, sexual energy around them. And I think that there's kind of like this elephant in the room where people are like missing that little element. And if we just like honor and say, yes, this energy is possibly present with these medicines, then I think that already changes the dynamic, because then people will approach it with more mindfulness and more safety. So I think, yeah, I just wanted to hear your reflection. Yeah.
Well, basically all wounds come down to an intimacy wound, whether it's a sexual one or not. Like, we're going to be pushed up against that wound with the medicines and the ceremony, but medicine doesn't just heal things. It'll make everything way bigger so that you see what it is you have to do and shift. And so sometimes that's the part that can be too much for certain containers, obviously, and so, yeah, it needs to be with more experienced people that have also, kind of done some trauma work, done work around the lineage, it's also like neat. Like, I do a lot of qigong and like tribal fusion belly dance mixed with qigong and some type of movement before because we need to know how to move